back to the wetlands and the woods on the east side. And so you can see, again, on the east side of the site, we have outlines of potential fields. So you can see the number. Those are U12 fields. So those would be larger fields for youth soccer. That would be that softball diamond is 200 foot to the foul poles, which is adequate for softball and Little League. And so you can see the amount of space that you have outside of the educational programmatic needs. We have adequate parking, which is adjacent to all the functions. Here on the north edge of the site, we located the central office alternate high school building. That footprint is about 14,000 square feet. So if, again, we need to realize that 25 to 28,000 square foot total, that would be a two-story building. Again, the grade quickly ramps up from that building to Marion Road. So the height of that building, while it's 2 stories close to the street, it is set down. So it really does take a lot of the scale off the height of that building when you see it from the road. And again, those play fields in the back, very flat, gradual slope. So that seems like very natural use out there. And then along Jarvis, east of the house property where you see that chunk taken out of our site. Again, that road that driveway that exits out on the Jarvis, that could be situated in a number of different ways. But you do have some usable land over there as well, which could be also for future use. It is large enough for a smaller field or courts, tennis, pickleball, or basketball courts. Similar to the Norton site, the building target here is approximately 100,000 square feet. Again, until the ed specs are developed, that was a rough number based on the approximate projections that we had for this school. This is a second scheme that we did. Similar to the last one, we are facing the building along Marion Road. So similarly, you enter in on the upper level, and then the classroom wing steps down as you travel eastward and the grade drops away from Marion Road. Here we are crowding the neighbor a little bit more, but what this does, similar to the other one, it really creates the future rec or future use. It gives them their own dedicated area. And so here on the north edge of the site, we actually have the potential for an additional drive and parking for that future use, completely separated from the entries and exits of the education use. And you can see there that along that driveway, you can line fields along the north edge of the site. And what needs to happen here is they would really cascade down the hill. As this hill goes down, we need to create plateaus to create the area for these fields. And ultimately, that parking that's in the middle of the north edge of the site and that other field furthest to the northeast, those would all be pretty much on the flat farmland. So again, the education function is all on the south edge of the site here. So in this scheme, the central office and alternate high school are also freestanding from the building along Jarvis Road. And so again, we're making use of that extra area of available space, kind of giving them their own area of the site. The Jarvis Road entrance really works as their entry. They have dedicated parking off of that for their building. And then again, similar to the last scheme, really creating the separate traffic loops for buses. In this case, just the way the traffic flow works out, buses could come in off of Jarvis, loop around the south edge of the building, and drop off on the west next to the administration. Car traffic could enter in off of Marion Road. The parent drop would be on the north side of the building. And really here, those cars could then drive out and exit on Jarvis, or just as easily, we could loop them through the parking lot and back out onto Marion, depending on, what these streets can handle for traffic. I think a traffic study would be a future step for this project to really understand the loads on these streets and what they can handle in terms of traffic impact that would be created by this site. This building is a a courtyard scheme. So it's a loop around a courtyard that brings daylight into some of these interior spaces. But in terms of the footprint, it's very similar to option one. So those building layouts are very interchangeable in these schemes. And it's really about how we manage the site on these. And I will mention on all these schemes, there's a dashed outline for a future build out, which is an extension. In all 4 cases, the 4 test fits that we did, those are all additions to the classroom wing, which are all 2-story. And that footprint is on each level, you would be able to have an additional 4 classrooms or 8 total in a multi-story. So, 8 classrooms, that's a substantial amount of students. And I think a lot of these options have varying degrees of ability to go even beyond that, depending on the layout or the option. But we tried to keep it apples to apples with that 8 classroom future build out. This is the 3rd test fit. We really somewhat similar to option 1, but we turned the building 90 and went deeper into the site, which kept a lot of the functions away from the neighbor, kept the parking central to all the elements, and really kept the future town functions again on the east side of the site. This is a courtyard building. I think the one big difference here is that this is a slightly larger building that has the central office and the alternate high school integrated into the building. But on the northwest corner, they do have their own dedicated entry, parking, drop-off loop. So a little more paving around the building, but it does free up the site a little bit more on the south edge. So we kind of respect the neighbor and the edge along Jarvis a little bit more. And again, you can see the outlines of the fields, which would be, potential future fields or use for the town. This option is slightly different. In here, we tried to push all the education use further onto the site. In this case, the building is pretty much on the flat farmland. And so unlike the other buildings where the second level stepped down as the grade dropped away, here the main level is all on a flat plateau. That is the farmland. And the second story for the classroom wing is up, which is a little more traditional when we do school construction. And what we do here is pushing all the education use onto the flat area. This building scheme is very similar to one of the ones that we did at the Norton site, where this L scheme creates like a safe haven in the back for where the student activities happen during the day. So play fields, the playscapes, PE, all that happens in the northeast corner behind the building where there's no interaction with vehicular traffic around the building. So all the traffic stays to the west and the north of the building, and really the students, all their activity happens behind the building. So it creates a safe environment. All the rec and futures really along the roads. And so, the traffic and the parking areas really creates a buffer between the rec or future uses and what's happening with the education. It kind of leaves the dealing with the topography for down the road because we're really pushing the education use on the flat part of the site. And so any future uses really needs to kind of deal with the topography that happens along Marion Road. But it does give you insight onto how we could really, I think, efficiently locate the building, keep the kids away from all the traffic, and build the educational use. And so those were the 4 test fits that we did. Again, a lot of the elements within these, I think, are interchangeable between, the number of fields or types of fields that we've outlined are obviously very interchangeable depending on what the need is for that future use.
Questions, comments from members of the council? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Yep.
Mr. Bowery? And I don't know if you guys want to leave this up
Yeah.
so that we can refer to it as we have questions?
Yeah.
Great.
the sewer line that's in there, is there going to be a need to work around that in terms of construction? For instance, is this the most expensive one because it's going to be built over the sewer and therefore more work has to be done to move it? And
This is the only option where the education use impacts
Mhm.
is the sewers. So I do think there's trade-offs for the cost of the school project in that you will probably have less impact with the topography along Marion. But yes, you need to deal with the sewer.
I also think for future use that you said it right, that if we were to have general town use, the west side would really be an issue of trying to build fields into there and cutting into that slope and making that probably a unrealistic expectation.
I think some of that would need to happen with the education portion, but
Right.
definitely it's a tough sell to completely create plateaus if
Yeah.
that is truly outside of the educational program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrow. Yes, Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The good news for you this evening is that I don't have the intimate knowledge of the site that I did with Norton. So it doesn't mean I don't have a list of questions, but they'll probably be a little easier. So in each of the scenarios, and since you have 4 up, we'll start with that one. But in each of the scenarios, can you tell me the number of classrooms? Is it identical in each scenario, and what is that number?
The edge specs have not been developed yet. And so when we started with Norton, knowing that this was an approximately 100,000 square foot school, we had a comparable project in South Windsor. And I actually, Colliers, I'm not quite sure the exact number of classrooms. I'm thinking it's in the 30s.
Yeah, I think the South Windsor one, I want to say around 29 to 30.
Okay.
But that enrollment was less too. So these enrollments are roughly 650, 670 for K to 6.
So you probably, 32 to 35 classrooms. And that's something that the ed specs will flush out. These are all equal in that regard. Those classroom wings are very similar.
And you've got the square footage to be able to do that. then?
Yes. Yeah. And
Okay.
there, any one of these schemes, there would be pushing and pulling of program. But yes, these are all sized to about 100,000 square feet.
In this scenario and in one of the other ones, possibly number 3, there's only 2 points of entry and exit. I know you mentioned that a traffic study would, touch upon those issues, but wouldn't it be more beneficial, or it seems like it would be more beneficial to have the 3? I think it was option 2 then, but option 2, it looks like you have the ability to put that same, instead of having the play there down in the bottom right-hand corner, you could still, where the bus drop is, you could have, enter from Marion, exit from Marion.
Yeah,
as
you just like this first scheme where it's really a one-way on and off of Marion, you could do the similar thing right there, just as you
Yeah.
said. Yeah.
So option 4 is the only one that doesn't. Just from your knowledge, are there benefits to having that third point and isolating the kind of the bus traffic from the parent traffic?
I think a lot of the schools that we've done are typically, we always strive for at least 2. We usually end up with 2. The South Windsor ones have 2. Here you have a lot more frontage on 2 roads, so you have the ability to do 3 if that helps with the site circulation. And I think it's, as you picked up on, clearly there's a lot more traffic coming in from the same one, and the buses and the cars have to split off the same road. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the other schemes clearly keep them more separated. And yes, that's probably ideal or more desirable. But the traffic studies might dictate where, we need to be further from a corner, like that intersection of Jarvis and Marion, where maybe that one-way entry just doesn't work. Maybe it's too close to the corner. That's something that needs to be flushed out a little bit more. Maybe Jarvis just can't take exit traffic. We just don't know that yet. But I think between the schemes, we've proven that we have enough ability to manipulate the site and the drives to achieve a good solution.
Option number 3, it appeared, and again, I know these are just kind of rough drawings, but it appeared to me that the square footage for the alternate high school central office was a much smaller space than the other options, that 1 and 2 specifically, that had that facility as a standalone. Is that accurate, or?
I think the building size accommodates it, and maybe, where some of the labels are, you're going to get some spread of program. One thing we did talk about, though, in one of our preliminary meetings was you will save some square footage on the central office alternate high school if you build it within the building, because you're getting shared mechanicals, some shared support. So there is some square foot economy in that case. But again, the overall square footage of this building is both programs. It's definitely a larger building than some of the other schemes.
And then I guess I covered my number 2 scenario. The number 1 scenario, the parking that's by the above the bus drop area, is that could that be used for faculty parking? Do you know how many spaces would fit into that?
I didn't label it. That's a lot of parking. It's not double loaded. It's single loaded. We kept it smaller to give more room to the fields, but the length of that is probably accommodates 50 to 60 cars. And it could be utilized, yes, for faculty. I think the intent that it was adjacent to the fields, so it's a matter of convenience depending on where you're going. I do realize that it's behind the bus gates, and so when those gates are closed, if you have the gates there and it's closed off, obviously that makes it difficult to come and go from that parking. Maybe the gates need to be relocated. Maybe that parking really is only after-hour parking, and that's something to be considered.
Excellent, thank you. My last question is really a question more for Dr. Solon, and certainly not for right now. We can hold on it, but I would at some point, Jeff, like to hear your thoughts about combining central office and the alternate high school. Just some kind of general thoughts, and we can save that for another time because we're doing test fit, but just I want to throw it out on the table for the.
Are you talking about combining them with a building, or because right now they're combined, really?
Right. So
Combining
to
with a
be
building or standalone building?
right, to be more like this, or either or, whether it's a standalone in options 1 and 2 or a combined into the elementary building like 3 and 4, that brings a whole nother aspect in, because I know that you've stated in the past that you weren't all that happy about having the alternate high school within another school building, whether it be elementary, middle, or high.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem, but I can certainly elaborate on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Other questions or comments? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, just one quick, going off what Peter just said, with the ones where the alternate high school is combined, I see, it's on one side, you have the alternate high school, I think it was option 4. And then the cafeteria, are you assuming that would be shared with the alternate, or would the alternate high school have its own cafeteria, have their own entrance? Everything will be separate in those cases?
We didn't get into that level of detail, and I don't think that we're fully programmed out to that level.
Okay.
But I think these schemes, when we, included the alternate high school within the building, we definitely wanted to make sure they had their own dedicated entry. So whether they shared anything or not, that's a programmatic decision that would have to be made. But they could definitely be completely separate.
And that area, like in that one, is still, you said it'll be a little less square footage because they're shared utilities, but so roughly that area is, I think you originally said it was going to be what, 14,000, 28,000?
But yeah, I mean, that's probably a stretch on this plan. You're probably pushing down pretty close to the cafeteria with that amount of square footage.
Okay,
But again, the overall building footprint is close to what it needs to be for
Okay.
both programs.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Other questions or comments? Mr. Jenks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, couple things. I think several of us have received some feedback from neighbors in this area about a traffic study or when a traffic study would happen. So I just was wondering, at what point of the process would we do a traffic study for this site?
I'd suggest, if this looks in a positive manner, I think the first step, even before a traffic study, is probably talking with your town planner and town staff as a preliminary discussion, just to get a feel for, what are the patterns and the flows through here at a local level. Typically, we'll do a traffic study, like say after referendum, we select a design team. But depending on that conversation with town staff, we may want to consider doing it early if it warrants it. It's typically during the design period, but depending on what the town staff says, if they had a concern, we might want to do a little bit earlier than that.
Okay. Thank you for that. And as far as the, first of all, it's very nice to see plans, or at least this level of plans after talking about this for so long. So this is great. Thank you. As far as the pieces, the additional future pieces in case we need to expand, you said they're all for about 8 classes. I assume that for each one of these scenarios, it would be about the same cost to add that space to each one, or would there be some variation?
I mean, at this level of detail, yes, it's the same square footage. So, from a planning standpoint, it would be the same. The only thing that might actually make that deviate is if there's any site concerns or, hardship, depending on how that gets added in after the fact. But big picture, it's all the same.
It's all the same. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jenks. Mr. Slocum?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe it was Plan 1 and then perhaps 3, the distances, the Jarvis Street building more from the residents on Jarvis. Is that correct?
Yes, here we really kept the building away from the neighbor, closer to Marion. Here obviously we're crowding the neighbor. They do have very good trees coverage around that building. When we were
Right.
on site, we couldn't even see their house. That doesn't mean those will be there forever.
Nor does it take care of the noise maybe at certain times of the day.
Yeah, they'll hear the kids regardless.
Right.
Yeah, obviously here we left the green space between the neighbors and the building and the parking.
And there's optimal use of future playing fields without a lot of cost to the town in constructing those. As far as taking away dirt and stuff like that, the future use is better positioned for future
It's
use.
flatter land, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you judged any of these, but which one did you draw first?
One. I mean, we brainstormed a number of ideas and locations right when we were on site walking around with our landscape architect. What if we do it there? How do we deal with the hill? So we were kind of brainstorming these just as we were walking the site. And I think we had 4 or 5 ideas, and it really, as they started to hit the paper, I really did run them through 1 through 4.
Okay.
But it was already something that we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to
Okay.
try this. And it played out. We lost one that didn't make any sense.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Thanks. So I'm not the only genius in the room. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Appreciate you letting us know that. Yes, Ms. Nichols.
looking past me. Having had been involved in these discussions for a long time, I appreciate being able to see the physical picture in front of me, and I appreciate the detail that you've given us in four options. I also appreciate the fact that you did put some consideration into the property owner that seems to be surrounded by this, and I think that's important to at least be aware of that, and you've done a good job at that. The question of the 3 entrances concerns me only a little bit when there are 2 entrances within a very short distance on Marion Road. So if people are going in the opposite directions, could that become an issue? So I kind of like the idea of just having 2 ways in and out rather than 3. But again, I would support that with a traffic study to make sure that that was able to be managed. I think that, as Mr. Slocum said, it makes sense to utilize the flatter services for future development of playground areas or recreational areas. I also appreciate the fact that there were a couple of plans that included the central office and the alternate high school separate from the regular building. I think that seems to meet the educational desires. Now, I'm not sure that I wouldn't change my mind as the plan evolved, but I think it's good to see them in a separate building if that's financially feasible. So I do appreciate being able to see several alternatives. It's helpful to see them laid out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Mr. Veliver.
Thank you, and I just want to say welcome back, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you.
That's it? Well, I noticed the other night that you didn't acknowledge my absence at all. As a matter of fact, you called Mr. Slocum Mr. Chairman. You're getting a little ahead of yourself. there, Mr.
It's good to see you back. Thank you.
Inside joke, folks.
But I wanted to say that it is good to see, and I echo the comments. It's nice to see. Just a couple quick questions. Relative from a size standpoint, just so from a scale standpoint, the building that's proposed, is there a school currently that it's roughly equivalent to? No, from a size perspective that we currently have. I mean, is this about the size of Highland? A little bit, how does it fit relative to what we have? Just what it looks like.
You would know better than
Highland total square footage wise is slightly bigger, a little bit. But I believe that's all single story.
Maybe Dodd too, yeah, Highland single story.
Yeah, Dodd's got the 2-story, so probably closer to Dodd, I want to say.
Okay. I just want to get a sense of scale there. Also, media, is that like library, that type of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So question, would there be a significant difference from a pricing standpoint as we're building this? I do like the idea probably of having a central office maybe separated from the building, but I do recognize that there is a sort of an economy of scale by putting it into buildings. You mentioned there's some savings on shared mechanicals and other things. But I was, if we had an option, I know this is in the future, this is really just a test fit, but does it make a difference price wise if you have them as a separate building?
I mean, this is another thing that we talked about briefly, and I think you just said it. Really, when it's all one building, there's just economy. The central office building, it's a smaller building. You might be able to construct it less expensively per square foot, but you definitely have more square footage total. You have 2 separate buildings. You're dealing with more of the site or a larger overall footprint of disturbance in theory. But it's obviously a big programmatic difference, whether it's in the building or out.
All right. My other question, and I think other counselors have already mentioned some of the other issues. My question goes to the wetlands in the background here. I mean, obviously, you have the edge of wetlands, and I agree that, perhaps putting the fields in the back, for future use, because that's where the flatter land is good. But I guess my question is, how much do we anticipate that the edge of wetlands, which run through some of depending on which option we look at, runs through some of the fields and the background there?
Sorry.
No problem.
I wanted to use my cursor, but that is the buffer. So that's actually a 50-foot offset
Right.
from the wetlands line. So the softball field that you're looking at, the wetlands where that buffer penetrates the deepest into the outfield, the actual wetlands are still outside of the field in that case.
Right.
And all along the east edge, the wetlands are well into the wood line. This site does continue to slope while it's very gradual. And so you still might see a little bit of buildup of plateau where these fields are, just to flatten it out a little bit. So you might get a little bit higher elevation where your fields are, which will, potentially help. I think what we need to do is look at, again, future steps. When you look at the subsurface information, you look at groundwater, that will dictate subsurface treatment under these fields, under the building, under the parking. So yes, we are obviously at the low point of the site where could be, water, but we are out of the actual wetlands with all these fields.
Right. So I know, obviously, I've had a couple people has commented, I think either in prior meetings or just people I've talked to, they're concerned that even though the wetlands are where they are, that area floods more than perhaps it appears on the ground. So, but obviously we have to take that into consideration, whatever option we choose. But I think I just want to put out there that, some of this land may ultimately, as much as it may be appears to be usable on the map, it may not be usable for chunks of the spring as we deal with it. But that's something we'd have to, that'd be in the planning phase. So I just wanted to see if that was taken into consideration. But that's why I do think having the building closer to the front not only takes the slope out of things, but also think that keeps the building and other things out of possible water issues as well. But I thank you for have the opportunity to see at least these four options. I think they're all at least workable, and we'll see going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. Other questions or comments? I have a quick, Ms. Pavano.
I'm sitting in the dark over here. Just for point of clarification, the buildings with the classrooms that are projected here, and then you mentioned that we could add 8 more classrooms, but how many classrooms would we initially be building?
That really depends on the ed specs, but based on the size with comparable programs that we kind of base this on, we were looking in 30 to 35 range for classrooms. But ultimately, the ed specs would dictate that.
Right now, and my second question is on the central offices, that would be phase 2, that would not be built with the actual first building of the classrooms? How is that?
I don't know how that would get phased. I think.
Well, I can answer that, Sandy. What we're trying to do is I think you recall, this council, at least most of us,
Right.
are interested in advancing an alternative to Humiston, putting it into phase 1.
I agree. Yeah.
So it's my understanding, assuming we keep going forward the way we are, I personally would like to see this in phase 1, whether
Right,
it's
right.
in this facility or some other alternative. What we've done is we've charged our consultants to give us some alternatives for closing Humiston,
Right.
whether it's here or on some other site or another building. That's up for discussion, but I think it should be in phase 1.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to see that was going to be incorporated. Thank you very much.
Just to harken back on some of the other comments about cost when it's in the building or out of the building. Obviously, if that gets built at a later time after the school's up, you got to think about the disturbances. You're definitely going to come in and undo some of the work that was done for the school. So that will definitely be a premium cost in that regard.
Great. I do have a quick comment, but I'm not going to reference any of these. So why don't we put this up so I can actually look out to the audience, if you don't mind. So Dave, thank you so much for your presentation. It's clear some thoughtful analysis went into it. And I do, and I'm sure we're all going to have a lot more detailed questions as we get further down the pike. I just don't think this is really the appropriate time to get into too many real detailed questions, because this is just kind of the next step towards determining whether this site is viable for the options that we're looking at. And clearly it is. Whether it includes an alternative for Humiston or not, that remains to be determined. Obviously, we need to hear from the Board of Ed relative to the red specs, et cetera, as to whether we want to move it to this location. And then we'll certainly be trying to put some determination as to costs. But again, I'm happy to see that it works well for our thoughts. As we get further down the road, clearly we're going to get into geotechnical, we're going to get into environmental. I absolutely believe we need to have a traffic and safety study done. I would advocate that it be done sooner than later. I really wouldn't want to do it. I know it's a little extra money, but I think we owe it to our people who live in that area, who are concerned about traffic and safety. So for me, I'd rather spend the money and make sure that if we are going to go forward with something here, that we can address all of their concerns in that neighborhood. We're all very concerned about making sure that we are very respectful to anyone in that area who lives there and has lived there for many years. We've gotten some letters from some people. I thank them for that. I can tell you I've read them, and I'm concerned about making sure we deal with traffic and safety appropriately as well. So to me, we ought to add that to our list of things to be doing sooner than later. We're going to be talking tonight about hopefully advancing the geotechnical and the environmental. Maybe what we can do, if I can get some consensus on it, is to get a proposal to deal with traffic and safety. And then sooner than later, in my opinion, I'd like to see that go forward. I think it's good information that we need. So that's really all I have to say about the test fit. I'm glad to see that we've done the work on both these locations. And again, this Marion Road site is large enough to accommodate certainly what we're talking about with the two elementary school options and then some. And our goal as we move forward is to hopefully make sure that we're maximizing the usability of that site. And so I think this test fit begins to look at that there's some alternatives for some fields that we may need down the road, or potentially for additional buildings if we may need them. So I think all of that's going to be part of our analysis as we go forward. So if there's no other questions or comments on this item, I'd like to move to item 4, which is discussion and possible action regarding geotechnical engineering services and environmental site analysis for Norton and the Casertano school sites. I won't ask anyone to read the resolution yet. Let's have a conversation about it. We all had received copies of proposals. And Chuck and John, maybe you can just kind of go over what those proposals were again, so that for our edification, but more importantly, the public's edification as to what those reports will do and the cost to the taxpayers for it. I believe we should be advancing it tonight. I think these two sites are certainly important to advancing school modernization in any way, shape, or form going forward. And that in order for us to keep this moving and work towards a referendum in April, if that's what we're all shooting for, which certainly I am, I think this work needs to get done. So, Chuck, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Chairman. As was shared previously with the committee, we received proposals from two companies, GNCB for the preliminary engineering work, specifically for the test boring. And they are proposing 3 to 5 test borings at each of those two sites. And then we also received a proposal from Langen for environmental site analysis study, again, for both sites. And the cost from GNCB for the Casertano property was $5,600. For the Norton property was $4,950 for a total of $10,550 for both sites. And the cost from Langen for their scope of services for the Casertano and Norton property were each $4,500 for a total of $9,000.
Thank you, John. Questions or comments from members of the council? Yes, Mr. Slocum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On these borings that are done, do they have to be done in specific places, areas of concern? You just do them randomly? Because you cited a number that you'd be doing, and they're differently sized parcels.
Correct. It's essentially an attempt to try to spread out the test boring locations on the property itself. Part of it is also based on where the buildings are assumed, or building is assumed to be placed, to try to ensure that Footings and things are not going to be impacted by anything that's, beneath the surface there. Again, they typically will look to do 3 to 5 test borings per site, and they will, spread those out throughout the property, but they will try to concentrate on areas where the anticipated building is to go.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Yes, Mr. Veliver.
What exactly does a geotechnical engineering survey reveal? Like what is the purpose of that? What will the result of it be?
For the test borings?
Oh, right. I mean, we're going
for
to
the-
geotechnical engineering services, and obviously environmental site assessment, as obviously that's pretty self-explanatory, making sure there's no problems there. But what the geotechnical engineering part of it, when you do those borings, what are they looking for?
They're looking to determine or establish what is, within the property. If you are having, soil conditions, existing conditions which are not favorable to placing slabs, foundations, the structural capacity of that soil, that may impact your costs for the site work. Also, if you have high groundwater, that's another impact. Rock, ledge, anything that's going to be another impact to the site costs. It's essentially a means of trying to keep your site number as realistic as possible. Those costs associated with excavation work and potentially bringing in any sewer lines, water lines, things that are going to be underground. You want to try to ensure that you don't have any surprises when it comes time to the actual construction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to expand. We just did one very recently on another site nearby, and we had encountered there's a large amount of fill that was placed years ago that wouldn't be conducive without soil improvement. So, and I don't suspect it here as it looks like it's virgins, a virgin site. But if there was, a lot of fill with organics, that's not conducive to supporting a building. So that's another condition we just ran into recently. And it probed us to do some test pits and do a little deeper dive into the site before we made a decision on that one.
and Dave, just to follow up, I mean, as we talk about budgeting, as we keep moving down the tracks, we're trying to get better information to make sure we can give the quality stuff to the taxpayers when they walk into the voter booth. We need to give them as much good information as we can. Understanding what's below the ground obviously helps us do that. We can clearly get a good sense on what construction costs are. Site work is always the big unknown. Geotechnical is a way for us to figure that out. So. Okay. So with that, I believe that we should be advancing this at this point. We do have a resolution here. If the council so desires to advance it at this point, I think it's important. I think it's worthwhile. So with that, if I have a member of the council that is willing to make the resolution, Mr.
Yeah.
Bowery?
Okay,
Yes.
you got it?
Tip is.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Be it resolved that the town council approves resolution 101421-1. Be it resolved that the town council allocates from the capital planning account $10,550 for geotechnical engineering services and $9,000 for environmental site assessments for the Norton and Casertano sites.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Bowery. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. I don't think, Mr. Bowery, you need to add much to it since we've just spoken about it.
No, other than the funds are available, we've made sure that there is project planning money available for various projects like this.
Correct. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passed unanimously. Thank you, council members. We will now move on to item 5, which is discussion regarding the proposals for ed specs. I believe we actually have a resolution here too, so I probably should say that. Although, Sean, do we need a resolution for this one? I guess if we're allocating out of capital planning, we do.
Yeah, I think just
Okay.
because of the dollar amount. that'd be
Okay.
great.
So we'll turn this, I guess, over to Chuck and John, if they can just kind of give us an update as to where we are relative to development of ed specs, or certainly, I know we have Dr. Solon and Mr. Massiana here from the school system. But one of the things that we keep rolling down the tracks, we need to make sure that the school side, the Board of Ed is working with their staff to develop ed specs for the buildings to make sure that we're designing in a way that works best for them. So really, this money is to continue to advance that work. I think it's important work. We're talking about it relative to the two elementary schools that has been up for discussion and is the recommendation of school modernization. I also think that it probably should include looking at Highland, because I know we've had, and I did watch the Board of Ed meeting last night, and, you know, the School Modernization Committee advanced a recommendation that suggested closing Darcy. It is, to my knowledge, all of the council members understanding that Darcy will be closing as part of this phase one project. There's been discussion as to what happens with the people in Darcy, the students in Darcy, and those that are in the kindergarten. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's my understanding that the kindergartners that are there will go back to their elementary school. The pre-K will go to Highland School. And it's also my understanding that when SMC looked at this with the consultants, that they determined through the enrollment projections that there would be enough capacity in Highland to take those students. The question becomes, is it designed and are the ed specs proper so that it would work appropriately? And so that's a piece of this that I don't think we have looked at in real detail. I know there was some consideration about it in school modernization. I see Chairman Neff here from SMC, so he can certainly give us some information later on. But it is my understanding that that's the case, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So I believe, in addition to the two schools that we're looking at for ed specs, we should be looking at Highland, because I think we need to kind of hone in on whether that will work and how it will work within the 10,000 square feet that's been identified in Highland School as extra space. Is that correct, Chuck?
Yes, I think the way you explained is correct. We purely looked at the need from a square footage on the space standard, which is really the state's vehicle statutorily for how much they're willing to reimburse. It's an indicator of what size the building should be. However, that needs to be married with the programming of the building, and in this case, the existing building, to see if the two coincide with each other. They don't always coincide, especially when we're talking about the programs that will be housed in Highland. And when we looked at it with the SMC, although the space standard was 10,000 square feet less than the existing building, it was right at that edge of, we need to take a deeper dive to it. And at that time, we weren't at that where we're at now to really do that. So there's always a caveat of, we need to take a deeper dive to make sure that that program could be accommodated there. And if not, we'd have to add square footage. We didn't add square footage because the ratio, that space standard we talked was at 91%. And typically, in our experience, the state of Connecticut, I think would rarely support additional space on a building with a 91% ratio. However, with these types of programs, they require more space in your standard general classrooms. So I think it warrants that additional look that Council Horace Chairman Horace is talking about.
Okay, and Tim, if you don't mind, let me just finish my thought, and then we'll get to you on this. I want to be clear that everyone understands what we're talking about. So I believe you looked out in years 29 and 30. And at that point, you were at a 91% space standard for Highland, assuming you moved the pre-K from Darcy to Highland School. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So what that 91% space standard provided for was approximately 10,000 square feet of additional square footage. So the thought at the time by SMC was there is an option to relocate the pre-K from Darcy to Highland. Now we're just at a point where we need to kind of define that and make sure that the square footage works relative to the ed specs that the school needs to make it function properly and deliver the best education. And if it doesn't, do we need to add some square footage to Highland to make sure that it does work? Is that fair, Chuck? Okay, so that's kind of the issue that we're talking about. And I think in order for us to put some numbers to whether Highland works financially, or if the 10,000 works, or if not, we need to do a small addition to accommodate it. I think the ed specs will be critically important to getting to that point. So I'd like to see it included.
Yeah, correct. And also part of that, there's Dan Hansen. This is, kind of fresh and looking at this effort would also be, and what we would recommend is having Moser Pineline help us analyze the existing build, just taking the floor plan and doing an inventory of the all the classrooms in Highland, so we can compare the program versus the existing space and go, do they align, or where are we missing? Where do we have gaps? I think that'd be a very small effort on our behalf. I talked to Dave, I think Dave left, but Dave said they could do that, pretty easily to help us with that.
Thank you, Chuck. Are there questions or comments from members of the council? Mr. Slocum, my apologies, I
Yeah,
forgot.
Well, mine was probably, I'm glad we got the more fulsome answer you needed. Mine was simply a matter of the motion itself, which is going to, look for about $5,000, and that may not be sufficient to cover this additional. So it might be difficult to go on the fly with a guess of what we should add to this, because I think it's critical that we cover it and not delay. I'm not sure we can get that answer at this moment, but I'm sure someone has it in the
Tim,
back.
I would just add that the actual proposal itself, well, it was for $5,000, does say it's, can be adjusted. Not necessarily at the dollar range, but that we could prioritize this first and come back. Or if you felt like, these guys might be able to make, Chuck and John might be able to give you a number that makes more sense for the additional work. So you really have two options there.
Okay.
We could prioritize this work that you're talking about now, Highland Darcy, and then kind of come back with Norton Chapman stuff, or, just add money now.
I think we should add now. I'd rather keep this
Yeah.
train moving down the tracks. Now, do we have any money in the current account now that can be used for this, Sean? I know we're allocating out of the capital planning account specific to these items, but my recollection is we still had some money in the school modernization account, if you will.
Yeah.
Could use to accommodate this.
All right, so we don't need to modify this resolution. We can leave it at 5,000. We have other monies available to school modernization if we need it already. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think that answers our question.
Oh, good.
Yep. Ms. Nichols and then Mr. Talbot, you're next.
Thank you for allowing ladies first. And I just fully support what Rob says. In all of this, we've heard last night at the Board of Ed meeting and all of these meetings, there's so many moving pieces here, and we really need to pay attention to all the little details. And this is one. It's a special education program. We need to make sure that there's space for it in that school and not impact the regular programming in that school, so that they all fit within that school. So I absolutely agree that this should be done as right at the same time.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to actually dovetail off of what you were talking about, and for my own clarification, Dr. Solon, the programs that would be moving from Darcy and could be fit into Highland would include birth to 3 and EIC, because I know there's a revenue component there too.
Yeah, and Smart Start. And we acknowledge there are several kind of independent programs that work in very close concert with each other that are housed at Darcy, as you know. And we can't piecemeal those out. That, like I said, they work in concert closely with each other. The entire program would have to move. The other thing that, I think is noteworthy in this discussion is that when the 91% capacity rate for 2930 is calculated out with the redistricting, that accounts, it's a very generic formula. It's how many kids, then square footage. It doesn't necessarily account for the specialized programming that exists there. When you were to consider that, the 91% would certainly be significantly higher, which is why this evaluation is so critical, why the ed specs are so critical, to the point where we thought, geez, if we do these ed specs, would we actually be looking at adjusting perhaps a bit North End Elementary? If we can't do it here at Highland, while we're building another building, would this make more sense there? So I think this information is critical and it's imperative that we get it ASAP. I appreciate you guys expediting the process.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep, no problem, Mr. Talbot. And just to add one more piece to this, this is critical for our reimbursement from the state of Connecticut. State of Connecticut is not going to let us overbuild. So the school system is going to have to make a case for their programming that they want. And again, we have 10,000 square feet of excess space based on the enrollment projections in 2930. So Mr. Massiana and his staff, I believe, along with Dr. Solon, are going to have to build a case through their programming and the ed specs that we can sell to the state of Connecticut that says, okay, we can fit within that 10,000 square feet, or as Dr. Solon says, maybe we can't, and we need to add more square footage to Highland. But we have to defend that and support that to the state of Connecticut in order to get state reimbursement. If we cannot do that, we are on our own, and it is fully funded by the taxpayer. That is not our goal. So that's why we need to do this and make sure that we get it right. So we all need to sit at that table and make sure that we're certainly providing the service that the kids need, but we need to be efficient in our design of that space as well. Otherwise, we may not get reimbursed. So that's an important component of this. And we can't lose sight of that. We can't just say, well, we need an extra 20,000 square feet, because that's not going to fly with the state of Connecticut. If we truly need an extra 20,000 square feet, then we have to defend it. We have to bring it to the state, and they have to agree to it. So this is important work, and I'm glad we're advancing it. So with that, can I get a motion to advance this, Mr. Slocum?
Sure, thank you. Be resolved, the town council approves resolution 101421-2. Be resolved, the town council allocates the capital planning account $5,000 for development of educational specs for Chapman, Darcy, and Norton school projects.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. I'm sorry, second, Mr. Jenks. Thank you, Mr. Jenks.
mean
I don't
Highland?
think there's any further conversation necessary, Mr. Valiver.
Did you mean Highland?
Yeah, I did, because I was thinking of closing Darcy.
Well, we knew what you meant, but let's clarify it. It's
Sorry.
Chapman, Norton, and
Get
Highland.
that right. Thinking of the Darcy kids.
We good? No questions or comments? I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passed unanimously. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, now we're just going to get kind of to our general discussion regarding school modernization. One of the things I wanted to talk a little bit more about is the financials. Obviously, that's a big component of this. As you all know, we've been developing some spreadsheets so that we can give as good information as we can to the public, so that when you all go into that voter box, you have as good information as you can to make a decision that you think is in your best interest and the town's best interest. We have not changed, to my knowledge, Sean and Jim, the numbers. What we decided in our last meeting was we were going to be working towards some form of a spreadsheet that we could kind of provide a summary as to what the impacts of this project could be. And obviously, it includes our capital budget expenditures as well. So if you've been watching, what we've done is we've developed a timeline cash flow that includes the implementation of phase one of school modernization, plus all of the anticipated other capital items that'll be coming down the pike. Now, that's a tough task. We obviously don't have our crystal ball, but we spend as much time as we can to try to determine over the next 10 years what that might look like. That's what this financial model is going to show you all. We have developed that. I know it's a bit cumbersome. We tried to explain how it works last meeting. We're working towards a summary spreadsheet that'll allow, hopefully, the public to kind of plug in your house value, your car value, and it should spit out a number that says, okay, this is what the impacts will be to you based on the implementation of this project. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Sean just to give a little further explanation. Maybe we can put up on the board where we currently are. But to my knowledge, Jim, we have not changed any of the financial numbers. We're just working on that summary sheet, correct?
Correct.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll lead off a little bit. So we'll, and that was a good summary, from Chairman Orris for sure. I think at the last meeting, we did discuss the working kind of forward from the larger spreadsheet that we had that was a little more complicated with all of the various factors, as Chairman Orris said, walking through some of the other capital projects that we estimate for the next 10 years, other budgetary factors that would impact the mill rate. Based on the feedback we received last time, including for ultimately the calculator that would sort of customize this for an individual's property value, we did make some adjustments, and I can pull it up on the screen in just a second. One being that the appraised value of a house would be kind of the the input cell, if you will, that folks could put in what their home is worth, and then they could verify or cross-check that off the grand list should they so choose, but rather than having them kind of calculate the 70%. So we did take that feedback. We also did work in, rather than the entire 30-year estimate, we put it down to the more standard 10-year projections that we would typically do. And also based on the feedback from Councilor Slocum, we have worked in sort of separately at the side, the total tax bill that someone could expect based on all of our projections on operating increase, other debt, all of the other factors. So again, and as Chairman Orr said, we don't have a crystal ball for all of those, but this is a standard practice we go through with all of our budget development. So Jim worked hard on the larger, more complicated spreadsheet to sort of generate those numbers, and then I kind of worked them into the calculator. So if you'd like, I can kind of briefly go through that just to kind of see it and see if we get any more feedback. I will have to just plug it in here.
I think it's worthwhile. You all agree? Yeah, that'd be great, Sean. Thank
And
you.
if I could just add, these are kind of conservative projections. You know, most of the projections I do, we assume that non-tax revenue would remain flat. So most of our non-tax revenue are state revenues, departmental revenues. So obviously those could go up or down, but for purposes of this, we just assumed that those would remain flat. We also looked at town and Board of Ed expenditure trends over the last 5 years. Those were the averages we used to project out the expenditures going forward. We had to start somewhere. So we used 2.1%, which is the average over the last 5 years for education, and 2.52% for town expenditures. Otherwise, as Sean said, this includes, you know, all operating budget, projected increases based on those assumptions, including the impact of school modernization.
Jim, we're shocked that
Yeah.
you used a conservative approach.
Yeah.
Do you want me to turn this a little? Can you guys all see? Well, I'll see.
You can, Sean, thanks. And just again, for the public's edification, we talked a lot about this last meeting. You know, the council's worked very hard when we looked forward in our going forward capital budget to kind of clear the decks, if you will, of projects that we kind of thought we could put to the side to make more room for school modernization. Our goal here was to try to minimize the impact to the taxpayers because we know this is a huge lift. We all know it, folks. We all may differ on which plan needs to go forward. We may differ on how much we can each afford, but no matter what, it's a big lift for this community. One that I think every member of this council believes needs to happen. We may disagree on which option ought to go forward, but the fact of the matter is we all agree on something needs to be done, and it needs to be done sooner than later. So towards that end, we've really worked hard as a group to look out into the future as best we can, clear the decks of the other capital projects that we thought we could put on hold, while still providing the services that you all expect for us to deliver as a community and a local government. And that's what this does. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Sean.
All right, great. So what I'll do is I'm going to ask Jim to just kind of walk through sort of three different spreadsheets. First, the background, kind of all of the non-debt components that we projected out for 10 years, then how those worked into the spreadsheet that we had 2 meetings ago, and then I'll take it for the calculator real quick, if that's all right. So Jim, take it away.
Yeah, so this is just a summary of the projections that I did, again, for all non-debt expenditure, operating expenditures for the general fund. So education, general government, capital non-recurring, and contingency. Those are the categories that we typically work with when we do our budget. So what I did, again, was I looked back 5 years to see what our trends were for both education increases from a budget perspective. Again, 2.10% was what it came out for education, 2.52 for general government. And I rolled those forward over the next 10 years approximately to be consistent with our debt projections for that period of time. I didn't make any assumptions for an increase in our capital non-recurring contributions. So those remain flat for that 10-year period, and contingency, same thing. So that's what I started with.
Next one.
Yeah.
So Jim, your annual grand list growth is at 1.5% still?
we could change it, but that's what we were working up.
Okay.
up
No, I'm
with
not
to
looking to
this point.
change. I just
Yeah.
forgot what you were using.
So this is, the big spreadsheet that I had used to project, it shows not only our existing debt, but also the projected debt on the capital expenditure plan that we just approved last month. And I know we have a couple of projects going to referendum in November, but the assumption is that hopefully those will get approved. And this shows the scenario 6 projected debt. And also now, so I added the expenditures for all general fund operating budget, non-debt expenditures that are projected. And I think I highlighted that column. So general fund budget projections other than debt.
So again, those were from the spreadsheet we were just looking at there. So that's just translating it.
So the column right next to that, I think those are the mill rates that we were projecting with just the school modernization scenario 6 impact, but not the total impact with operating budget increases and so forth. So kind of to cut to the chase, we now have a column there that shows the mill rate impact for not only the SMC, but also including the general fund operating increases. So that, if you want to compare, that's that second column or third column in green. So you could see 34.91 versus the 33.54, I believe, that we had projected. That was just including the increases for scenario 6. And you could, as you go down, we capped out after that period of time at 38.41. But if you include all the operating increases, it would be 41.33. So, we can adjust these numbers going forward. Again, these are conservative as far as I'm concerned, because we're not making any assumptions about growth in non-tax revenues. And I believe we used 1.5 for this projection as far as economic growth in our grand list.
Great. Yes, Mr. Slocum.
How do we handle revals over that kind of a projection? I mean, because I see you're pressing, 40, 41 mils, danger dead time in some cases, you might say.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you for every calculation, but there is that issue. I know when there is a reval, typically, it looks like you got a tax cut, but everyone got the same tax bill. You know how it works. So is it maybe just a moot question, moot point?
Yeah, in some ways it sort of is, because it's self-correcting, right? Because it ends up just changing the numerator and you're now dividing it in a different way across the town. So ultimately, I think for projecting, especially when you translate from mill rate to tax bills, you kind of need to almost envision no reval, because you're showing the total amount of revenue needed to be generated and how that's divided up among the existing taxpayers. Obviously, new construction kind of changes that a little bit, but that's built into our grand list growth assumption. So yeah, I would say it would be very difficult to try to factor in projected revals, and then you might end up confusing folks more, that they think it's going to be a different number than it is.
See, you confused me.
Well, there you go.
But it's great. Self-correcting is great.
Self-correct.
Thank you.
Well, but you bring up the issue of reval, which I've brought it up in many meetings, and I'm not sure every member of the council agrees with me, and I could be wrong. But my fear is this: when reval gets done, that it's revenue neutral. I understand that. But it's my understanding that what I'm worried about is that there could be a larger percentage of that number fall on the backs of the residents. And so I assume that's a risk. Is that correct?
Going to be a shift one way or another, whether the residents or the businesses.
Right. So what I'm suggesting is that the percentages from business to residents probably won't stay the same.
Right.
So while the revenue is neutral, if we have a bigger burden falling on the backs of the residential side of our community, That's a big concern. I'm still very concerned about our businesses, don't get me wrong. But nonetheless, if they're going down as a percentage and the residents are going up, which I personally think may happen, because I think residential values have gone up over the last year or so, particularly with COVID. We've had a lot of migration of people into our community buying residences here. Everyone's house is up. We're happy about it, but we really haven't talked about that issue. And I've been kind of ringing that bell to this group. I'm not sure that everyone's listening, but the reality is, folks, is don't forget about reval and the potential for the shift between the business side and the residential side. I believe that's a big risk that's not accounted for in these numbers, and everyone needs to understand that. So I may be the only one worried about it, but I'm still going to ring that bell.
All right, so now I'll just move on to an updated version. Again, this is very much in draft form and open for feedback. But as you'll see here, as I said at the outset, it's a little hard to read. I apologize. I'll zoom in a little. But a couple switches from the way it was presented last time. Now, the cell that folks would be entering their value into would be the full market appraised value of their home. It is important that that's, folks should verify that on this link right here with what is on the grand list right now, because ultimately that is what your current assessment is. But this time now what's happening is you can put in what, if you don't know your assessment, you can put in what you believe your home to be worth. And this will take obviously 70% of that. And then that will come up with the amount that is ultimately subject to the tax calculation. The numbers that I've put in here just happen to be the medians that we've often discussed. So again, we're used to seeing the median assessed value at $212,000 and the median for two vehicles at about $9,250 each, which would total $18,500 of assessed value. So again, that's a property value, home value of $303,000 and two vehicle value, market value of $26,000. So again, just like before, those translate down to these columns below, although I have added a couple more, again, from the feedback at our last meeting. And there are now 10 years projected, again, building in all of the data from Jim's spreadsheets prior to this one. You'll see that the scenario 6 phase 1 mill rate impact, again, this hasn't changed, but it's now showing the 10 years here. Translating that mill rate impact into dollars. Again, this is annual dollars specific for just the scenario 6 phase 1 associated debt service. The two columns here, again, are all other general fund budget projections, including other debt. As Jim said at the outset, the town operating budget increase estimates, the Board of Ed operating budget increase estimates, and any other factors we have there. I will say in its current form, this is not currently adjustable by the calculation here for grand list growth assumptions, but we can certainly work that in. That's something we're just still working on. But either way, that brings you the total tax bill associated again with everything not in scenario 6 phase 1. And then now combining this column G, the purple column, is taking that tax bill as it is with all projections and then adding the scenario 6 phase 1, again, responsive to what Mr. Slocum, I think, was looking for. And so that would give you your projected total tax bill for those future 10 years in this column. I did just add sort of the annual increase year over year for each of those years, and then just took a percent, what that percent is equal to. So you'll see total tax bill increases projected in the current scenario anywhere from a little under 1% to about 2.8% and 4% in 1 year. So again, very much estimates, but that's the vision for the calculator. And then here at the bottom is, again, the grand list growth assumption, which we've tweaked at times to estimate what that impact would be on folks. I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jim. Questions, comments from members of the council? Yes, Mr. Slocum.
Mine was just, could you just provide us with a printout of your calculator situation with that mid-range of value house, just so we can have that? Because I'm assuming the calculator's not ready for prime time yet, or is it?
I mean, it's certainly ready as presented, and unless, I guess the only caveat would be, should any of the other conversations we've had earlier change the project values, I think what Chairman Orris said is right. We have, the calculations have been done, so to speak, from the inputs, if you will. But if any of those are changing, if they need to be increased by 5 million or 10 million or whatever, we could certainly update them. As I understand it, a lot of those are pretty much within the ranges we've talked about, the high lows. So I don't see the overall impact of someone moving more than a few dollars. So
Right.
it's certainly ready to be put up on the website or something like that if we wanted to do that.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea, and that's what we're moving towards. Clearly, making sure that this is available to the public is of utmost importance to us. It's on our website as it currently exists, so these numbers are there. As you see it up on the screen, that's what you can find on our website. The Board of Ed, to my knowledge, has a link to that as well on their website. So it's out there, it's readily available. You can certainly call Town Hall if you want a printed copy and we'll get you one. So it's there and it's available as it currently exists. There's certainly going to be some tweaking of these numbers as we continue down the tracks based on some of the conversations we've had. As we dial in the ed specs, those ed specs will kind of dictate whether some of our assumptions relative to the school modernization costs, whether they're real. We think they are. We have included a $12 million gross number, to my knowledge, for Humiston. That's already in these numbers as a Humiston option. I think we ought to have some conversation about that tonight. As I watched the meeting last night, from the Board of Ed's perspective, they have used a $7 million number to potentially renovate Humiston. We've used a plug number based on our consultant's advice for a new facility for Humiston at $12 million gross. I think we need to have a conversation because I think the Board of Ed did talk about feeling like maybe we should just renovate Humiston because it's the cheaper option, and saving the difference between, $5 million, $7 to $12 million is worthwhile. I'm not sure about that. I'd like to have more dialogue with it. We're talking about putting, if $7 million is the right number, and I guess one of the questions I would ask is, where did that $7 million come from and what does it mean? Is it just to renovate for ADA compliance or is it to renovate as new? Because the standard for reimbursement from the state of Connecticut, as I know it, under the auspices that we're using, is renovate as new. If that's not the case, we need to know that. So I think we need to have some dialogue around the Humiston issue so that we can get on board with the school system. Based on what I watched last night, I think there's a disconnect in that issue. And so I'd like to get that clarified. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just a disconnect. And I think we need to clarify it and move forward in a united way as to which way we go with this. I personally don't think putting $7 million or potentially more into a 109-year-old building that's basically a structure that is, if you've been in Humiston, you know what I'm saying. It's got a lot of levels. It's confusing, narrow hallways. I just don't see how, without putting an enormous amount of money into that facility, that we can make it even remotely close to building something new. So from my perspective, I'm open-minded to it. But, I know there were some Board of Ed members that said we have a cheaper option right under our nose. Well, cheaper isn't always better. And there has been a lot of people accusing this council of solely picking the cheaper option. That is absolutely not the case. This is the option that school modernization selected in a 9-3 vote with a committee that was made up of, first off, unanimously supported by the Board of Ed and the town council at the time. So we decided to create a bipartisan, broad-based committee to look at school modernization. We did that. It was a committee of 13 members, 7 of which were members of the community. That group was unanimously supported by all members of the town council and the Board of Ed. So we've been accused of that being a Republican-run group and a Republican-selected group. That's not the case. There's no politics in that. So let's put that aside. This group moved forward the plan that we have in front of us. And I think it's the right plan that we need to keep moving forward. And so I think we need to advance this. We need to have conversation about particularly Humiston and work together towards trying to get this done. But I'd like to have this conversation tonight, if we can, about the Humiston situation. Mr. Masiana, maybe you can give us some background as to where you guys came up with the $7 million. I've spoken with Chuck today, and to my knowledge, it didn't come out of the consultant side through SMC. SMC basically put a plug number in there of $12 million, hoping, actually, I think it was a $10 million number that you put in, Chuck. I apologize. You put a $10 million number in there to deal with the Humiston issue. And it didn't dictate whether it was a renovation or new. It was just $10 million, knowing we had to deal with it. So what I'd like to know from the school side is, where did the $7 million number come from? And is it renovate as new? Is it just ADA upgrades? And how does that compare to what we've been told by our consultants, that if we build something new for Humiston, which is the central office and the alternate high school, it's probably a $12 million number. So I think we need to kind of close the collars on this.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, we have the changing of the guard. So the $7 million number, I believe the origin of that was from the Perkins Eastman study that was done back in 2017. The other number that we have in the capital budget is $2 million, just to make Humiston ADA compliant, not a renovation. So the $12 million number is the number that came from Colliers through the SMC work. So that's kind of the genesis of the number. And I'm sure everybody realizes they're all estimates. We've not consulted, with a professional to give us, estimates recently. The 2017 number, I think, was arrived at pretty much the same way that Colliers did: square footage multiplied times current construction cost.
So that was done in 2017, based as a renovate as new for $7 million?
It was a renovation number, not necessarily renovate as new.
So the reality is, we really don't know whether we have a cheap alternative, which is $7 million, to renovate Humiston at this point, versus the $12 million, which is a current estimate based on the consultants that we've hired to walk this path with us. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah. Now, the $12 million, I just want to make sure I'm clear. The $12 million is the square footage of Humiston times $500 per square foot, roughly, Chuck.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and thanks for that clarification. The 12 million was really applying to the existing Humiston, which is, I think, 14,800 square feet. We got off the website, which is, I'm sorry?
The administration. Correct. Right, so that's just the children.
Yeah, so we were taking that off of, there's a document online for that. So that's what that number is generated from. Now, just for clarification, if we're talking, 25 to 28,000, that number grows. And just
But my point is, it wasn't something that this group did. This is a number that's being used from a prior group in 2017 that I would suggest is probably very outdated and very unreliable. And we don't even know if it was renovated as new. So the reality is certainly underscores to me the fact that we need to collaborate with the school system as to how we go forward with Humiston, and whether a new school option for them is the best option versus some renovation of the existing facility. I don't believe we have enough information to determine that we have a more affordable option right under our nose.
Can I just ask a question? If we're building a separate building for the offices and the alternate high school, what type of reimbursement from the state would we get if we combine that in a separate building? Would they have to separate how much square footage is the offices and how much, but we'd still get the typical reimbursement for the alternate high school, correct?
Yeah, the school component of that would be at the new school construction rate, which is 36% roughly, right? And then my understanding is that the office component would be at half that rate, so roughly 18%.
So the 12 million that we're talking about is before reimbursement?
And to be clear, the 12 million is just on the student side. that it's more than that if we can add administrative offices as well?
Yeah, I want to double check on the square footage because we're really, that 12 million was really a placeholder because at the end of SMC, if we remember, it was the directions we need to do something with Humiston. And so we didn't do an evaluation of the building. We didn't look at, hazardous materials and do a survey there. So that number was really a broad placeholder. It wasn't based on any inspections or investigations into the bill. So just want to clarify that. We just wanted to make sure we accounted for something for Humiston when we went to do the cash flow projections that we gave to Mr. Jascott.
But what you did, I'm sorry, but it's important, Don, that we understand this. You threw $10 million into this Humiston line item at the time you were working on it for SMC. You've since updated it more recently to the $12 million number. And that, if you take $500 a square foot times roughly 25,000 square feet, you're at $12 million. So if $500 a square foot is the right number for new construction, then I guess that's what we would continue to use. The question that I want to try to figure out is, and again, that's a gross number. It's not a number that's going to be reimbursed. That doesn't include reimbursement from the state, which we just went over. I'm not even sure the state will even consider reimbursement for a 109-year-old building. I'd like to hear from the state that they would even consider. I know in doing some research that they've denied some older buildings that they felt were subpar on a renovation because they just didn't think it was worth it. So the numbers we're throwing around don't even talk about the potential for reimbursement on the new side versus maybe we don't have a reimbursement on Humiston if we renovate because it's a 109-year-old building. Have we had a conversation with the state to determine that?
Not to that depth, if they would participate or not. We did
Okay.
inquire about if there was work done there, whether it's alterations or renovations. Those are two statutory different terms. What would the rate be for, the central office side versus the alternative high school side? And that inquiry has been submitted to the state. We're waiting to hear back from them.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mr.
That's
Walsh.
right. But we did talk to the state about Chapman, which is a much younger school, so to speak, and they wouldn't recommend the renovate to new at Chapman, right? If I recall.
No,
No?
we didn't have a conversation with them about that. I think that
We assume that.
No, I think we made the decision that to renovate that building would be cost prohibitive. That it would be like, putting a new engine in my 83 Yugo. It
But
just
wouldn't
doesn't
that be
make
the
much
same for Humiston too? I would think almost. Yeah,
potentially. And I
Yeah.
think that's, when Rob asked the question, do we look at that?
Mhm.
I think we need to look at that. And it's a multifaceted issue. It's not exclusively about cost. Cost is one factor.
Right.
Another factor, I heard people voicing the desire to look at central office in Humiston as a standalone rather than tucked into an elementary school, which, I expressed that interest as well. That's one component of this. Another component is the fact that the current location is really advantageous for us in the sense that it's so close to Cheshire High School. We have a lot of students that are sharing time between the two buildings and staff that are sharing time between the two buildings. And so it's advantageous. So there is a benefit there too.
I'm sorry. For the alternate high school, do you just need classrooms, or do you need a gym? Do you need cafeteria? I'm assuming you need a cafeteria at least.
Yeah, we have our food brought in from the high school cafeteria. There is a dining area. It's more like, a lounge space, if you will, with tables for dining. There's also the second floor of Humiston School has a makeshift kind of gym in it for a physical education class. That's a state requirement for graduation. So we do run physical education there. It doesn't need what you might consider to be a traditional gym space. If you were to build new or anything like that, I wouldn't want to suggest that be the case. But we need to offer the same diversity of educational experiences for students at the alternative school that we do at the Cheshire High School.
Questions, comments on this issue? Yes, Mr. Bowery.
Just related to that, Superintendent, would it make sense if Norton is considered significantly closer that maybe it get added to Norton as opposed to getting added to the new North End school?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think that would be something that we would look at. The space at Norton certainly is much more restrictive than it would be on the North End.
Right.
So, you have that consideration. You also have the consideration of how is the Darcy, ed spec situation going to play out with Highland? And if that doesn't work, and I think, doing something to Darcy, fixing something with the Darcy situation is a priority. If the Darcy situation doesn't work at Highland, I think the North End school, if we're going in that direction, is probably the priority at that point. Okay. So there are a lot of dominoes left to fall here. There's clearly additional information that would benefit the board and the council in the process. That's why, we appreciate you approving the expedience of a ed spec process so that we can get all that information. We can hear from the state about Humiston, if that's even feasible or not. All these things, I think, have to be put on the table before a well-educated decision can be made about those situations.
And I do like the fact that you're looking at alternative ways to continue to get less school buildings, less number of them. We can cut back on the overhead that way by having Darcy, if it can't move, as we're talking about the Highland, then putting it in with the new North End Chapman would be a better way to go and still eliminate a building.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we're narrowing down here in our scope of decisions and options, we're still trying to keep as many cards on the table as we can and be as efficient as possible economically, what makes the most sense. But I want to prioritize that this is, or really just state that a priority of, I know the council and the board, certainly our administrative team, has been educationally what makes the most sense too. So all those things have to be considered in the fold here, and that's where we're trying to get more information to make sure that we can consider all those things when we make these decisions.
All right, and I want to pick up on one thing I talked about Humiston in a prior meeting in a small way, and maybe bring it up again in a larger way. It is possible, I believe, that we could find office space that would work. Because there is a lot of extra office space right now, all over, not just in Cheshire, that we could use that the owner of the property would fix up the space and we could do a 10 or 15 or 20-year lease. And I'd like to see how we could go about looking at that. And I don't know what the mechanism of that is. Do we ask you folks to look at it? Do we ask our consultant? Do we ask the town manager? Who do we ask to go and look? Our economic development coordinator? Who do we ask to go and look and talk to businesses, that the people that own office buildings that have whatever it is, 12,000 square feet that you need, and say, look, if we rent it, for so long, will you be able to design it the way that we want it and build it out, and what would it cost us? So that at least we'd have a number to know whether that made sense as well.
Sure. I mean, I think that's a consideration that can be made in this process. Right now, there's a benefit to having central office with Humiston. We don't have a dedicated on-site administrator for that program per se, but all of us who work in central office have kind of been the de facto administrator at different times. So there's a benefit there. That's just another consideration as we explore these things. But certainly, I think we could look at central office in a separate location, standalone. I know Wallingford has that situation, some other towns. And yeah, we could look at that as an option as we bring all this stuff as we reach ahead here,
Right. And your comment about administrator actually lends credence to the thought that I've said several times, and that is that maybe we can find if there is still excess capacity at the high school, make it a separate entrance and all, and then you've got the administration right there.
I do have an analysis put together for you. I just have to finalize that to get to you. Dr. Gadd worked through that with all of our available classrooms and all the information. So I just have to really kind of package that and get that to you. There are two variables there. One is, the space component. The other is that the reality that the majority of our students that are in the alternative program are there because the high school itself was just overwhelming for them. It's a big place. There are a lot of kids. And so, even if we could put it in there, I don't know that educationally, ultimately, if we're outplacing these students, is significantly more expensive than doing this. If we were going to say one or the other, central office would probably make more sense there. But I don't really think, after looking at the analysis, that there's space for either of those. Particularly, I don't know that there's space for it now, particularly when the bubble, of our enrollment continues to move up and would even make it more constricted. But I'll get you that information next week.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this gets back then to my philosophical discussion from early in the evening about, where does the alternative school go? Do we tie it in with central office, and how does all that look? And Mr. Morrow, you're right on point. We had discussions about potentially moving central office to a lease space. So I think it's absolutely an option we should look at for, putting 12 million or potentially a lot more into a 109-year-old building. So.
And to your point, Mr. Talbot, the reimbursement on central office from the state is minimal.
Right.
So, if we're going to seek reimbursement, we're going to get more certainly on the school side versus the central office. And we didn't restrict you all when we talked about this. We've been talking about the potential for a rental option as part of your due diligence. If you need more resources in terms of a little subcommittee of some sort, or just the fact that you have some of us sit around the table from the Board of Ed side and the town council side, we're happy to do that, to kind of look at some of these options. Again, we're not precluding any other opportunities for Humiston. I think what we're saying is we'd like to see Humiston as part of phase one, whatever that option is. While we're doing the test fit for the Marion Road site, we felt it was prudent to go ahead and see if it worked there. But that doesn't mean that it's a foregone conclusion that that's where it needs to go. Certainly not in my mind, and I don't think in any of your minds. So we're all ears as to what works best for you on the school side and where we can figure this out. I just don't think that it's appropriate to put a lot of money into a 109-year-old building that really, at the end of the day, probably isn't going to work as well as you'd like it to. So, it may be the cheaper option. I don't think it's the best option.
I totally agree. And I think, I can't tell you if it is or it isn't right now, right? And that's the part of the whole conundrum here. And like I said, as this comes to a head, we are gathering more information. Certainly, I know Mr. Martelli has a really good grasp of availability in the community. We'll connect with him to make sure that, we're looking at every viable option.
Any other questions or comments on this? Again, I'm not looking to drive all the agenda on this. So, if no one has any other issues, I think one of the things we should be talking about also tonight is timeline. What I'm very worried about is the fact that we need to make, assuming we're going to get into the next state cycle, we need to make a application by June 30th. Doesn't mean we need to be at referendum by April. And Chuck, you and I talked about this. You really can go to referendum after the June 30th application. And I don't know if everybody understands that, but Chuck and I talked about it today. That you really could delay your referendum post the application. I think it's sometime in November. It's by November that you have to have it done so that you could be in that June cycle, as long as you can give them the certification that's been approved in a referendum by November 1st. Is that correct, Chuck?
Can never tell what's on. Yeah, statutorily, that's correct.
Right.
It allows you to, as long as you vote to schedule the referendum prior to the June 30, so you have to submit that vote with the grant application. Yes, we're going to schedule a referendum and report the results by November 15, so that they can put you on the priority list by December 15th, which is statutory as well.
Correct. Mr. Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Chuck, you couldn't go to the next regular election. It would still have to be a special election if November 1 is the deadline, assuming that election day is going to be somewhere around November 3rd for the following, for 22.
No, it's actually November 15th is the actual date. So you have to report the results of that referendum by November 15th. So if you hold it on the 2nd, 3rd, even on the 10th, as long as you have the town clerk certify that, here's the vote, we send it up to the state, then it'll still be valid.
So I wanted to make sure everyone understood that, because I'm not sure everyone did. The big issue for us is not the referendum necessarily. It's making application to the state of Connecticut by June 30th.
Right.
Otherwise, we're going to fall into the next state cycle, which is going to be a problem for us as a community because of our enrollment issues. So, the reason why I'm pushing so hard for the short time that I'm left at the dais here is knowing that we need to get to a June 30th deadline, and we still got a lot of work to do, folks. We've got a lot of work to do in collaboration with the school system in terms of building ed specs, finalizing our budgets, getting this package ready to submit to the state. And, that time is going to go by really quick. And, I'm sure we're going to get into this discussion at some point because I'm sure the public will bring it up or others. But the longer we keep trying to figure out whether we're going down the 2 elementary school path, which I'm not wavering on, nor do I think is most of the council. I know there's at least 2 here that want to go the other route. The longer we delay this conversation, we're going to miss this June 30th date. And that's my real fear. It's not about politics. It's not about what Rob Orris wants. I think Tony said last night his preference was a new high school. I got to be honest, my preference is a new high school too. I think if we're going to start school modernization, I'd love to start with the high school because it impacts out all the kids. Our whole community benefits from that. The state would never allow it because that's not what our enrollment provides. That's not where our immediate need is. It was a non-starter with the state of Connecticut. So we put our personal opinions behind us and we moved forward with what was in the best interest of the community. I get it. There's still some dialogue on whether the middle school is a better option or not. But the facts are SMC did their job with a broad-based group of people. It was a data-driven process. It wasn't a process, as some would say, the cheapest option. It was not that. And Chuck Neth is here as the chairman of that group. I'm sure he can support that. It was a data-driven process of a broad-based group of people, 9-3 voting for a 2 elementary school option. It was wholeheartedly supported by the state of Connecticut. And it's got us to where we are. And what I've said is I'm going to honor that work unless I hear from the school system that educationally it doesn't work for them. I've not heard that. Quite the contrary. I think I've asked Dr. Solon numerous times, do the 2 elementary school options work for you? And he said, yes. And I don't believe that's changed. So I think it's a clear decision, folks. If we want to get something done, we have to unite behind a plan. Is it perfect for everybody? Absolutely not. It's not what I wanted. I wanted a new high school. But I'm willing to put my personal intentions aside for the betterment of this community and the betterment of the kids. And God help us if politics is going to play a place in this for the kids. Because if we miss June 30th, because we're all playing politics, and I'm not pointing fingers, if we're all playing politics, guess who suffers, folks? The kids do. And if we're not united, we're not going to get something done. We have to start. We have to begin. It's only phase 1. So that's where I stand. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to echo your sentiment on that. As a member of the SMC and sitting through all those meetings and listening to all the enrollment numbers and listening to all the different options, I think the 9 people who voted made a very right choice in what we felt was the best option to come forward. And I was the one who made the proposal on March 17 that we were submitting scenario 6 as the preferred option with a backup in case the Board of Ed or the superintendent said that option didn't work. And like Mr. Orr said, we haven't heard that yet. So this is why we're continuing down this road. I have a real issue with hearing, people saying that, there's a majority of people who want the middle school when, we had a communications subcommittee on the SMC who did surveys, who had Facebook pages, Twitter accounts. There's a lot of word got out to the people. Whether they wanted to submit their ideas or their suggestions at that time or not, we did get some. But like anything, we don't get a lot of people until they start seeing it coming down closer that it's time to make a decision. I feel that, we've given them, the people of this town, a lot of opportunity. And I still ask people to give us input on what we're looking at. It's very important. Like Mr. Jinks said, we received an email today from somebody who's concerned about the Castertano property. So obviously we want to look into that and make sure that the traffic study is done. But, Dr. Sullivan said it last night. If we don't do something, there are going to be temporary buildings put behind our schools in the next 3 to 5 years at a cost to this town, and I think a cost to our kids, because we don't want to put the children in temporary buildings because of security issues and because of learning issues. They all need to be in the same building. And just a reminder to everybody, if you vote against the referendum, it's your choice. It may be because you can't afford it or whatever it is. But the other option, if it fails, is we're going to go back to square one and have to start all over again. And that's something I really don't want to see. And I'm hoping that we can get behind this as a council and as the citizens of this community behind this option, say, yes, this is needed and we must move forward. And that's really what I'm hoping we can accomplish here in the next month or two.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Ms. Nichols?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As I sit here and listen to this, I don't know how many of you who are watching or listening today have the same experience that I have. But when I first moved to Cheshire, I was part of watching the building of the new Highland School. And the new Highland School was modern and it was going to be wonderful. And the community was very concerned about its cost and all of the same things that we're concerned about today. And at that time, I was newly married. I had a teaching job and I had a small budget. But I knew that I wanted my children to have a good school. So I supported that. And as a result, my children got to go to Highland School. They both graduated from Cheshire High School. And in the interim, the schools have aged and they've changed. Now you people who have moved here have young kids. Some of you don't have children yet, but many of us have children that have already been educated in the school. As a citizen, my responsibility is to provide the best for everybody in Cheshire. And I am a senior citizen. I'm now moving to my 4th house in Cheshire, which is 1/4 the size of the one that I've been living in for the last 20 years. And my tax dollars are just as important to me as yours are to you. I no longer work, so I'm retired. So like many of you, I have a fixed income. But I am a member of a community which has the responsibility to support the children of today, just like somebody did when it was my children's turn to go to school. As a member of the SMC and as a member of this council, it is my job to make sure that the options that come before us have been well thought out and well vetted and really, really, really looked at and scrutinized to make sure that your tax dollars are spent wisely so that in another, let's see, when the Highland School, my kids started there in 1972, I think, or 71. And that many years, the people that live in Cheshire will be up to deciding what's going to happen to the schools that we're building today. It's a process, folks. It's something that happens. It's cyclical. Houses and buildings age. And even people like me. So I'm really supportive of this option. I worked for the length of time on the SMC. I've changed my opinion as we've walked through it because, as Rob said, I really have no issue with having a 6 to 8 middle school. But as the facts unfolded, they did not support that option for us. I was part of those state phone calls. I listened to what it was. I've listened to what we said. We have many things that we need to look into. And as Rob just said, there's so many small pieces, and Dr. Solon said, we really have a whole lot of dominoes that if any one of them falls, we could ruin the job. We have to make sure that none of them will fall. So it's important to get the word right. I know that I have many people who've called me and talked to me that they support one or the other of the modernization issues, but I've also had many people in my segment of the community who said, I can't afford this. As citizens, you need to afford to make sure that our kids have good educations. And if you want to sell your house, the people who are going to come here want to have a good education. So we have to do that in a responsible way. And that's why I'm sitting here. I agree. We need to move it forward, Rob. I agree with you 100%. We need to look at the options and put aside our personal opinions and look at the facts, but we can't do it quickly. We need to take the time to get it right, but not lollygog around because we can't make a decision before June. It has to be done. If we miss that June deadline, it will be 3 or 4 years, if we ever get anything done. So I support Rob's opinion. I support this project unless, and we uncover in any of those geotechnical surveys or any of the other things that make it impossible to do. So that's my opinion at the moment.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Yes, Mr. Jinks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to push back a little bit on I think there's a comment that made that this is about personal agenda or personal opinion. I mean, my preference would have been a high school as well, way back when. But as we've discussed, that was that was something the state wouldn't support. This has never been about my preference. My concern, as I've said many times, has to do with the full project, the 3 phases, and have it be perpetuate through those 3 phases. If we go to if we go through the 2 elementary schools and we end up in a situation where they're not quite big enough, that seems like that's going to be jeopardizing the next few phases. Chuck and I know Chuck Neth and I know have a disagreement on whether or not the 97% capacity rate at the end of the decade or 95% is more flexible. Personally, I think K-5 at 95% is more flexible. It gives us more space to grow, as we certainly will probably grow. We have some new information with our current enrollments this year being beyond what we were expecting just a year ago. We have a lot of new developments that's kind of come online over the past year since we did our projections. We have new information there that I think we need to look at and consider. Again, I want to see, like everyone else, I want to see something happen sooner rather than later. I also want to make sure that we end up, going through all 3 phases successfully. I think like everyone else does. I think one question I have is back when we were looking at, I think sort of, a year ago, the SMC was kind of aiming for going to application in June of this year and going to referendum perhaps November. We were looking at perhaps beginning to build a building in, I think, or having a completed building in 25-26. Was that correct? Do you remember, John?
Yes, that would probably be correlate to that time frame.
Okay, so
About
if we're
3 to 4 years beyond from the approval to the completion of the construction.
Okay. So if we're looking now at possibly a referendum not until next November, are we back a year? Is it 26, 27 then? Is that what we're looking at? Okay. So obviously we want to get things done sooner rather than later. I mean, we all agree with that. To me, a good way to proceed would be to, I hear, and we've received communication from the public almost entirely. It's been one-sided in favor of the 6-day middle school. And I've been hearing that from, the public for a year now. I put a survey out just to try and get a sense of, because I was, hearing mostly from one side. I wanted to get a sense of what everyone was thinking. So I put out a survey myself to try to get a sense of that, and got over 300 responses in a few weeks. I just think that we have time to put something out to the public, whether it's from the Board of Ed or from the council. If it's just a simple electronic survey, which our survey company did one back in the spring, they could do one for us again, just to give us we want to have a successful referendum. So let's figure out now, based on the two scenarios, what the public is feeling, and then let's go forward. If we're looking at now possibly a referendum not until next November, that especially seems to me to give us enough time, given that collecting a survey, putting together a survey wouldn't take us that long. So then we're including the public a little more, and we're going to them, we're going to where it's convenient for them to give us the feedback we need. That I think is going to go a long way toward a successful referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jinks. And the only thing I would say is relative to the referendum issue, very detailed buttoned up package has to be done by June 30th. So it's not like we have time to kick the can on a lot of decisions till next November. We have the latitude to do that, but the application date of June 30th doesn't change. And so that's what I'm really concerned about, is that the more we continue going down multiple paths, the less time we focus on all of the things that we've been trying to talk about tonight that still need to get done on whatever plan goes forward. And in my opinion, I know which plan is going forward. I've committed to it. I'm not embarrassed to say it. And I just think the more we divert, the less chance we have of making that June 30th deadline. So, I disagree with a lot of what Mr. Jinks has said on this. That's not shocking. I don't understand his enrollment and space issues. We've tried to collaborate and talk about this at the dais. The state of Connecticut doesn't let you overbuild, whether it's a new middle school or whether it's 2 elementary schools, if you're going to get reimbursement. So both of these options have been right-sized by our consultants. If in fact our enrollment numbers far outpace what the professional has given us, then we have an opportunity down the road to reevaluate that with the state of Connecticut, make some modifications to the building. I believe that just happened in South Windsor. But they're not going to let us do it now. We've given them an enrollment projection that was based on an outside consultant who does this every day. We have to rely on our experts. That's what they do. And that's what the state's going to do. They're not going to listen to what Rob Orris says about enrollment. They're going to listen to what SLR said in our report, because they do it every day. And that's how these two plans were developed. One was developed based on that requirement for the new middle school, and one was developed on the 2 elementary schools. So at the end of the day, you may be slightly different in where you are in terms of capacity, but they're very close, because the state won't allow you to overbuild either option. What we need to do, is what I've been saying, is to make sure that we accommodate for expansion in whatever option we go forward. So that if we need to add some classrooms to a particular building, we can do it relatively easily down the road. And at the point where we can prove it to the state of Connecticut and obtain reimbursement for it and minimize the impacts to the taxpayers. We can't do it now. The state won't let us. So maybe I'm not too swift, but I'm not understanding Mr. Jinks' argument here. He's been using it over and over and over again. And I've had conversations with the consultants who we hired, who we need to rely on, and I don't believe they get it. Maybe I'm not too swift, so I'll have another conversation with them, but I'm just not understanding your argument, Jim. Well, let me give Mr. Jinks an opportunity to respond, and then I'll go to you, Ms. Slocum.
So I think what I've been trying to say is that the 10-year window, because of the growth that we're experiencing now and the growth that we're expecting, is confining for us, and it's inconvenient for us. But we have an option with the 6 to 8 middle school and new Chapman, where we don't need to necessarily be as concerned about that, about being so right about the projections that we have. And obviously, we're not going to be right one way or other. And it seems like right now, we're going to overshoot them fairly significantly just in the new information we have since the projections have been done. That's my argument, is that we have a plan, a proposal that the SMC advanced that really eliminates the risk of the schools, of this building the elementary schools and then having to add on to them shortly thereafter. I mean, it should be that cost, and that should be a consideration versus doing the middle school is my only point. Like I said, we don't want to be in a situation where we're telling the community that we have this plan, the elementary schools is going to solve the problem, and then have to come back later on and be like, well, actually, no, we have to add on to them pretty significantly. I mean, I can imagine that would be a real problem for further referendums down the line. And like I said, I think it jeopardizes the whole project. So that's my argument. I just think we have projections done professionally. I'm not debating that whatsoever. But the information now is about a year old. It seems to me maybe we need to perhaps update those to some degree. I don't know what that would take. I don't know, necessarily how long that might take. But we're still kind of pushing out the when this is due, and it seems like there's some time to get a little bit more information.
Thank you, Mr. Jinks. Mr. Slocum?
Well, mine is just a comment mostly surrounded by the actions of the council over the last number of months on this whole thing. And every direction coming out of this council, including votes for planning money and things like that, are dealing with the two new elementary schools. We haven't spent a dime on exploring a middle school. We are working, as far as I'm concerned, on adding to this something to do with Humiston. That's really where the discussion is sort of coming around in my mind and figuring that portion out. But in every other capacity, vote, minutes, anything you read around here, yeah, there's been debate from two members of the council currently about what we should do. But the council and the council majority has been directing through its votes, planning dollars, bringing us closer to the trigger and giving us more information as we go along. I think that message has been quite clear. That it gets muddied up across the street, well, that's up to the Board of Education to resolve. And ed specs can help frame some of this, but not as far as the middle school goes. We're not dealing with that component. We just haven't been. And unless I've been asleep for half of these meetings, I do pay attention. We're not doing test fits on where the middle school is going to go in the North End. It's just not being authorized by this group. And it's just the way it is. And if in the end it changes everything because we're all wrong and this referendum takes place next November, fine. But if we're not ready to just accept that even as a group here, that's too bad because the majority's already accepted it. And these guys are working at our behest to get us the answers. To me, it's clear. It's clear what we're doing here. And if it's not clear across the street, they got to wise up.
Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Mr. Talbot?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As one of the people, I guess, that's been singled out as the minority, I'll do this. I'll make my point extremely clear that school modernization is the most important thing that is facing this town. There is no question about it in any of our minds. And let me be clear about where I have been on my stance. My stance has been that the vast majority of the information that I have received has been in favor of the middle school option. I believe that we should be doing a survey to make sure that the option that we are moving forward is the option that the public will support, whether the referendum is in April, whether the referendum is in September, whether the referendum is in November of 22. It has to pass And it has to be something that is palatable to the population of this entire town. I am incredibly proud of the work that the School Modernization Committee did. And if anybody thinks that that's not the case, they are very wrong. Because these 13 people worked incredibly hard, nonstop, to come up with these plans. And it would be a shame if we got to a referendum and did not present and did not understand exactly how the residents of this town would vote towards it. Because ultimately, what have we said? The most important thing is school modernization. High school, middle school, elementary schools. I will get behind 110% the option that this town will support so we can move modernization forward. This isn't about what 9 people want. This is about, and I'm deja vu, I said this however many years ago when we went through this school modernization plan before. This is not about the vote of 9 people. It's not about the vote of a 13-member modernization committee. It's about a referendum that will be put out to 29,000 people. And if we want them to support it, then it had better look like something that we know they will support. I hope I have taken any doubt off of where I stand on this issue, and I appreciate it, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Mr. Talbot. Other questions or comments? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, I just had one other addition. Back in January of this year, I believe it was, is when we decided to do the survey that was done. I was against doing the survey at the time because I felt we didn't have the options ready at the time. And I think Mr. Neth was the other person who felt the same way, that doing a survey that cost $35,000, $40,000 wasn't the right time to do it, just to find out, how we could market it. And we went forward with it. They contacted 400 people, both on the business end. This is a professional survey company who really explained how it worked. They said that it's a very good scenario of how the people in this town are looking at school modernization. There were over 900 people who did the survey online. So, there were a lot of people who knew about school modernization. When you look at the numbers, the 37% of the people who were called about school modernization were very interested in school modernization. 41.5% were somewhat interested. And 8.3% were somewhat uninterested. 11% were not at all interested, and 2.3% didn't know. So it goes to say, maybe some of the people weren't educating themselves on what was going on in this town, but there's a diverse number there. That 78.5% were totally or somewhat interested in school modernization. It's not the entire town, but I think everybody on this will tell you, every one of us are, like Mr. Talbot said, know that school modernization has to happen. And the plan that was submitted by the 9-3 count, those group of people were chosen by the town council, the elected officials, and the Board of Ed elected officials. It's hard to put out there. You can't really put it out to vote, but how would another survey help? I don't know. It's another $35,000, $40,000, but do we have the time to do that? I don't know. But in my opinion, I think, what we've gone through as a school modernization committee for the last year and a half, I think we have it right. And I think we should continue moving forward with the plan that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Barry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would remind us as council members and remind the public that we're a representative form of government. And I would remind everybody that I would expect our 29,000 residents to use the information that we set in motion with the Board of Ed to come through the SMC. That is how hopefully we, as the elected officials and your representatives, and you as voters who have the ultimate say in whatever passes, that's where you're going to get your information from what they did and from what we're doing now. It's still a vetting process. It's still going through all of that. My reason for wanting to move forward with continuing to get information on this is because this plan is educationally sound. The state has said that. Our superintendent has said that. It's cost effective. Well, it's a little bit less expensive than the alternative plans that have been talked about. Its capital costs are indeed less, and the operating expenses are less as well. And I can't say it any better than the chairman of SMC, Mr. Ness, said last night. The flexibility that's built into this plan is why I'm forwarding this. Yes, there are people who want just one specific thing. They want to be able to have language, Spanish in all 12 grades. They want to be able to have 6th grade with 7th and 8th. They want to be able to have all these other different things that are specific to what they may want. But this is a big picture overall situation, and it is educationally sound, it is cost effective, it's flexible, and I want to continue to find information about this plan and get it out to the voters and let them make the decision.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Other questions or comments? Ms. Pavano?
I think we should look at how many years that we've been putting money into all these schools. I was on the Board of Ed for 8 years. We did 8 budgets, and we spent millions of dollars. Every year, our capital expenditures our budget spends millions of dollars on windows and all kinds of other things. If you really look at it, we could have paid for this school years ago. Now the costs are definitely a lot higher. I would absolutely hate to see this delayed any longer. You just cannot keep kicking the can down the road. The buildings are getting older and older every year. Our children deserve better. So let's get behind a plan and vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavano. Other questions or comments? Before we move on, the only last thing I would say on this topic, and I'm going to say it again, every member of this council is someone that I respect immensely. They've given back a lot to this community, and I hope you all recognize that, as well as the Board of Ed. We are all volunteers, and we're all working hard to advance something that we think is in the best interest of the community. So while we may have disagreements, I hope at the end of the day it remains respectful. I think it does. And we're really all working towards what we hope will be a successful referendum. And I couldn't agree more with Mr. Talbot when he says we want to advance a referendum that'll pass. Of course we want to do that. Why would we go through this? I personally believe that SMC, the Board of Ed, the Town Council, has done an enormous amount of work to provide opportunities for the public to weigh in. And we've heard from the public, some very much for the middle school, some very much for the elementary option, and some very much for doing nothing because they can't afford it. And the reality is we're elected to represent everybody, not just a small faction. And so I personally believe that there's been an effort to advance a lot of emails pushing the 6 through 8 middle school. I believe in personal dialogue I have with people. I'm very active in the community. I talk to a lot of people. It's not just done through email. It's done through personal correspondence. It's done through a whole lot of other venues, personal phone calls. So I believe we've done a really good job of taking the temperature of the community, and I get it. I'm not sure we're fully aligned on this at the moment. But I don't think another survey is going to bring any more clarity to that. I think we need to move something forward for the reasons I've already talked about. And I also believe that we're all elected to lead. That's what I'm doing. Not going to be around much longer. I'm sure some of you out in the audience are very happy about that. But until I leave this dais, I'm going to work my butt off for the people that elected me. And I'm going to do what I think is in the best interest of this community and the kids. That's all I've ever done. I believe this option of the 2 elementary schools is the best option for this community for a lot of reasons. It works for the school system. I'm honoring the work that the SMC did, which was a data-driven process. And while I'm not sure it's fully affordable for everybody, it's the best shot we got financially. Because there's a lot of people, folks, in this community that are very worried about what this is going to do to their wallets. So a half a dozen or a dozen or 20 emails from people pushing a 6 through 8 middle school is relevant to me, and I respect that. I take that into my thinking. But we get a lot of input from a lot of other people who are worried about making their payments on their houses next month. And that $400, $500, $600 or a multiple mill rate increase over the course of this could be devastating to them. Seniors that have lived in this community all their lives on fixed incomes that I don't want to see pushed out of here when they should be relaxed in enjoying this community. So my job as chairman here is to represent everybody, not just a small faction. I believe I'm doing it, and I believe I'm doing it in the best way I can. And so those that want a 6 through 8 middle school, I respect that. I really do. But I'm not going to abandon the 2 elementary school option for all of the reasons that I suggested. And so I agree with you, Mr. Slocum. I think we need to keep moving forward. And at the end of the day, the council has to take a vote. And if it's a 7-2 vote, so be it. If it's a 5-4 vote, so be it. I know we're all doing what we believe is in the best interest of this community. But I think we were elected to lead, and I think we've done all we can to give the opportunity for the public to weigh in. And it's time to move forward. We have a deadline coming. I know our consultants are very concerned about making that deadline. We've got a lot of work to do. And I see Dr. Solon shaking his head to the timing issues. I know you're probably worried about timing too. And so we got to get more to work, folks, on the plan, a plan, not multiple plans. And so, God, I hope we can do something. We're going to have a public comment section for everybody. So I know, Mr. Rockwell, thank you. But this is a tough conversation that I think we've all been delaying. I'm not on social media for a lot of reasons. But I know it's talked about a lot on social media, and I respect that venue, but not everybody's there. A lot of people like to pick up phone. I've gotten a lot of letters directly to me, handwritten from people who still do that. So, let's keep working together, folks. I know we differ to some degree, but let's try to get something done for the kids. And if it fails, I'm worried that it's going to take an awful long time to begin this process. So, anybody else have anything? I want to make sure our council members have an opportunity to speak. This is a really important issue. Mr. Talbot's right. This is the biggest issue facing our community in a long, long time. We need to get it right. And I respect you, Mr. Talbot. You know that. I respect you immensely. You and I have served on this committee for a long, long time together. And I consider Peter a mentor in a lot of ways. He's been on this council for a long time, just like I do Mr. Slocum and Ms. Nichols, who have been here before me and allowed me the opportunity to grow from their experience. We're all good people. We're all working hard for the betterment of this community. I hope we can get behind something that we can be proud of and get this process started. Eventually, every building's going to get touched. I hope. That's what the kids deserve. But if we don't get started, folks, I worry about what that does to the kids. So, and there's no other general comments. The one last thing I want to go over is I do think we should be advancing a request for traffic studies. So I don't know, unless the council disagrees with me, I'd love to get some proposals on a traffic study, particularly for Marion Road. Maybe you can get them for both, but we can decide if we only need one for Marion and Jarvis. I think that's important. Certainly there's people there that are very concerned about having a new structure on a facility and a property that has nothing now. Obviously Norton has an existing facility, so the impacts there are less from a traffic perspective. But nonetheless, as I said, we want to make sure that we're being very, very cautious about how we impact all of the people that live in these various neighborhoods. So I'd like to see us advance a traffic study, particularly on Marion and Jarvis sooner than later. So can we get a proposal? And then we as a group can decide if it's worth pulling the trigger now or waiting. I'm advocating to do it now. I'm asking to get proposals. We don't need a motion for that. When we get the proposals back, we're going to have to vote on spending the money, allocating the money to go ahead and do it. So that's all I'm saying. Okay? So unless there's nothing else, that's all I have for tonight. I know there's members of the public here. I offer an opportunity for you to come up and speak. Please give us your name and address for the record. Please keep your comments respectful. If they're not, I will cut you off. We've never had that before, so I don't expect that, but let's be respectful to each other. And I look forward to hearing from as many people that you want.
Tim White, 11 Colonial Court, a member of the Board of Ed. First off, Chairman Norris, thank you for what you just said about leading. In my opinion, you are. Moving forward, you set a path a couple years ago, and there are differences of opinion on a lot of different things, but I think this is the way to go to move forward. And I also really don't want to see us spending, another $35,000 or $40,000 on a survey. I think following this path is a good thing. A couple of quick points. So the referendum doesn't have to be done by June 30th. So that's interesting. Just a reminder, I'm guessing most of you would agree. I hope you would. No summertime referendums, something before June 15th or after September 1st, at least when most people are around. I know there's a few planning and zoning former members up here. Impervious surfaces, just very generally, assuming there's new construction going on, try to minimize impervious surfaces. And generally the last point, as I've mentioned before, I'm a believer in sustainable building. I do want to see us look at the life cycle costs of any of these buildings. And a critical point that I had not mentioned before, when I have raised this, I think it's important to have that discussion before we go to referendum. There is a cost impact. What you could do is you can spend a little bit more money up front to save more money on the back end. But that would directly affect the number going out to referendum. I don't really know how big that number necessarily has to be. Solar, it's generally you do it as a lease anyway. Straightforward. It never hits the referendum number, I don't think. But I think it's important to have that discussion ahead of time in the next few months. I do believe that Colliers could facilitate that, make that happen without too much difficulty. So that's what I'm hoping will happen. And I also did speak this afternoon with Rich O'Gurrick, the chair of the Energy Commission, and he said it would be fair of me to say, my sentiments are the sentiments shared by the Energy Commission at large. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Other members of the audience, please come on up, give us your name and address for the record.
All right. Hi, everybody. Tom Rocco from 6 North Punt Road. And let me just make sure my cane doesn't fall. And let me put on my glasses. Starting to show my age. All right. You've already touched upon some of the things I'm going to ask you for. I think the things I'd like to know more about the school project can probably be summarized on a single sheet of paper. I think, I talk to people all the time, and politics is a passion of mine. I always try to bring up issues with people, and a lot of people don't know about this. I mean, I talk to people at church, people I bump into in the store, and I ask them, what do you think of the school project they're proposing? And they don't even know that there's a project taking place. So I don't know how this is going to be presented at referendum. Are you going to put it out as a single one lump sum, allocation, or is it going to be done in phases? Like, will there be a referendum on phase 1? And then a few years later, a referendum on phase 2. Is that how it's going to be done?
Phase 1 is the only item up for discussion for referendum at this point, Mr. Rocco.
Okay. All right. So do you know the amount of that phase 1 approximately? Is it like the information I got from the town was about $83 million for phase 1.
Yeah, it's gross. It's a little bit more than that, but, after reimbursement. And again, so the public understands, Mr. Rocco, we're going to be putting out a gross number for referendum, to my understanding, and we're going to need to be clear to the public that there will be state reimbursement for a portion of that and what the net effect is. But the referendum will have to approve the gross number. Is that correct, Chuck and John?
Okay, it's good to know what's the cost per household for these different phases. And in the SMC report, there was a table that was presented that described the average cost per household, which peaked at about $2,000 a year. And I think that must have been for the full project. And when I saw that, I was like, it was kind of staggering, because that's a tough pill to swallow, $2,000 a year. And it peaked at that level, and then it sort of trailed off. It was like a 30-year amortization chart. And I think that's what you need. People need to know what is their impact on their bottom line, on their household budget. And maybe you can even, if you can, I don't know if it's possible, to incorporate that into the referendum language, so that people have a really good idea what the cost is. And it should be described as phase one, so that people know maybe there's other things coming down the road that they should be aware of later. Because I think the price tag is pretty steep. I really do. I think it's a lot of money to have to shell out as a taxpayer. But I think people need to know, what's the impact going to be on me, as an individual taxpayer. That's basically it. I know you guys have done a lot of work. I know it's hard to sometimes collaborate. I know it's hard to hear a lot of the rifling that goes on social media. I know I probably fired a few exchanges at some of you over the last few weeks. But that's all, kind of like road rage, I guess, Facebook road rage going on. The other thing is, the Cheshire Herald reported that the net cost, or the gross cost of the project, is about $540 million. Is that right? That's right. Again, people need to know this. I don't know how you can put that in, somewhere in the referendum language, that this is phase one of a $540 million 10-year, 20-year project. I think that's just an important thing for people to understand, because I got to tell you, people are going to show up at the polls, and they're going to be a little bit shocked that I think a lot of people just don't know this is happening. So that's my opinion, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rocco.
You're welcome.
Yes, Mr. Barby.
Just to clarify, to answer the question directly, the high share of the district share net amount is 87 million, like you said. It's the gross amount is 130 million of phase one of the plan that the SMC recommended.
All right.
And part two is 109 net and 189 gross.
Okay. Yeah, you can probably put that type of information into a single spreadsheet or a single table and really inform the public what the overall cost is going to be if all three phases are approved.
It's in the school modernization report as well, which is online. Yeah.
All right. I'll take a closer look. All right.
And
Thank you.
Mr. Rocco, it's also on our website, as we talked earlier, in the spreadsheet that we were talking about earlier. All of that information is on the town website and also on a link from the Board of Ed. And what we're adding to that is exactly what you asked, is what is the impact to me as a taxpayer? I think I'd mentioned it earlier. We'll have an area where you can plug in your assessed value of your home and your cars, and immediately we'll calculate what the impact will be based on the projections we're making, understanding it's only phase one.
Right.
So, but that information is currently available except for the summary sheet, which will be on shortly, according to Sean. But we're doing everything we can to make sure the public understands what's going on. Again, SMC had a marketing subcommittee that worked on this. They did a lot of work, excellent work to inform the community. I think we did some other public, was it at the Fall Festival that we did some work on this last year? And we're doing the best we can, Mr. Rocco, to get the information out there. And it's not easy, as you know.
It's tough.
So we're trying, and that's been our goal from the beginning, is to make sure that we're giving the public good information so that they can make a decision that they believe is in their best interest and in the best interest of the town. So we're trying.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Jenks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Mr. Rocco.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
I just want to say that I've always admired your work that you put into this for 14 terms, I think it was.
14 years. yeah.
14
7
years.
terms,
Yeah, 7 terms.
Felt like 14 terms.
14 terms, but 14 terms. Yeah. So I just also want to say that in the survey work that I did, there's about 52% of people said they were only somewhat aware. Another 18% said they were not aware. So we have a lot of work to do. Obviously, you're exactly right that most people really have very little idea of what's in the proposals at this point. And so that we definitely, even though we've had all these meetings and been working on this for so long, it is truly the case that people are really still pretty much in the dark about what we're working towards. So your point's well taken.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you,
Have a
Mr.
good
Jenks.
night.
Thank you, Mr. Rocco.
You're welcome.
Terry Terzakis, 226 Mixville Road. Yes, Terzakis. Mixville, yes, 226. Thank you to all of you for all the work you do. It is widely appreciated by everybody, Board of Ed, and the committee, if you're out there watching. I want to echo Mr. Talbot and Mr. Jinks. Mr. Orris, you say you don't understand Mr. Jinks' opinion. His opinion seems to be that of the residents of Cheshire, a large majority of them. This is not a new playground. This isn't the turf field. If it passes, great. If it doesn't, oh, there's still a football field. This is huge. You guys have all admitted that. We owe it to, you guys owe it to us to give us the option. The committee did an amazing amount of work, and God bless them, and thank you for that. And they presented 2 great options. You've been stressing 9 people voted for one of the options. 9 out of 29,000 something people in this town. 9? You're going to hang your hat on 9? Please, something in advance of this referendum. It doesn't have to be a $40,000 survey. Why can't it be something on our website, on the town website, just to get the temperature of what the people are going to want? Do you want this option? Do you want that option? I won't vote for any option. Get the temperature of the town people, because I honestly feel from talking to many, many parents in this town that the option that you are pushing is going to fail. And that's going to suck for all of us. Please get out to the public of this town. Find out what it is we want. Now you have so much information now. We have so much information on both options, even just from the meetings that I've been going to, how much has advanced. This is now the time. We didn't have all this information before. Everyone keeps saying, we've been giving you this information. We've been wanting public input. We haven't been to this stage yet. We're at a pretty good level where if you can get that to us, and again, it doesn't have to be a $40,000 survey, something that just lets us say to you, this is where we're leaning. Because if you're going to get 80% of the townspeople who don't want what you're pushing, then we've really screwed up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Terzakis. And I do want to just rebut your statement, which you made, saying that I don't understand Mr. Jinks's opinion. I don't believe I ever said that. What I said was, I don't understand his space planning argument, which is enrollment-based and very factual. So I have always understood and respected his opinion. That's a very different thing. So I appreciate the fact that I clarify that, because I take it as if somehow you think I don't respect his opinion. That's not the case. What I was saying is I don't understand his space planning argument, and I've had multiple conversations with our experts. I'm not convinced they do either, based on the way the state looks at our space planning. That's a very different statement. You're welcome.
Mr. Harris, could I just add one thing over here?
Yes, Mr. Walsh.
When the survey people came out to talk to us about the survey, we were all concerned about how they do a survey. Because surveys, like, could be weighted either way. Just the people who want one thing could just heavily weigh in on that. So by us having this survey company, which did charge, I think, $35,000 or $40,000, they did it in a scientific manner where they selectively chose people of different age groups, different demographics, businesses, and that's really the only way you can really do an accurate survey. So to put something on the website, that could easily be weighted any way you want. And to accurately do one, you're going to have to spend the money. And that's something that I'm really not in favor of doing at this point. So.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Other members of the public, please come on up.
Doing that again. Chuck Neff, 1355 Notch Road. I just had a general question for the talk about Humiston. So originally we had talked about Humiston, and there's a question of why can't we move it to the high school? And looking at the plans tonight, we had a standalone facility at an elementary school that had the alternate high school and the administration. What is the difference of having it at an elementary school versus having an outbuilding at the high school or even built into the high school? It seems like you'd still have those kids going to a school that's very large and maybe unpopular. So that's one question I had. The second question was really in regards to the enrollment. So to Mr. Jink's point, we had talked about the enrollment or utilization of scenario 6 in 2029 and 2030. And the utilization's at 97% in the elementary schools. What's not being said though is there's the same enrollment issue in the other scenario. You have 95% utilization in 2029, 2030. It's nearly identical. It's the same thing. Not only that is you'll have a middle school that you built for a certain size. Now you have that enrollment that you're worried about. That middle school will also be too small. Then what are we going to do? So you talk about the one scenario where we might have to add on to the elementary schools at the end of scenario 6 if the enrollment were to increase. You'd be doing the same thing in the other plan. It's the same idea. So there's no real difference in the enrollment issue there. It's nearly identical. So I'll just listen to Dr. Solon's answer.
Thank you, Mr. Neff.
If you want me to reply.
If you can, Dr. Solon.
Yeah, so the question, I just want to clarify the question, Chuck. So about Humiston and central office, are you suggesting like building an addition on the CHS or a standalone facility there?
Yeah, so we had talked about the issue with moving Humiston to the high school.
Right.
Would be the alternate high school and the size of it, and it may be an issue for them to go there. But it would be an addition on there. Now we're looking at an outbuilding being built on an elementary school property.
Right.
Why could we not look at that outbuilding being on the high school property if that's what you were going to do? Or how is it any different for those kids or the administration to go to the elementary school versus the high school? It'd still be a larger school setting that they're going to. I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's why I don't recommend embedding the alternative high school into an elementary school either. And, I think that's what I was suggesting when I said, my preference would be standalone. I don't think that it's a crazy idea to look at that at the high school property. Not that I'm looking to evict Park and Rec, but, there was a conversation about that. Is there additional space? I don't know that there's enough acreage to do that work on the existing site without displacing something else significant. But, we can talk to Chuck and John about that as a potential option. That to me would be preferential to, embedding it in an elementary school or a standalone further away. I mean, additionally, there's the option of building like alternative school only size there and leasing someplace else. So, I mean, there are a lot of different permutations, and we could pursue that as one of those options.
If I could, a quick follow-up to that is, the reason I ask is 'cause my understanding is some students from the alternate high school go to the high school daily. So if you could cut down on that by walking across a parking lot or whatever it may be, that could be a benefit.
I agree. I think that, that is certainly a better option than, moving it to Marion and Jarvis, and probably even preferential to the current location at Humiston. Whether or not there's acreage to do that, we could talk to these guys and Dr. Gadd about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neth. And I can tell you that sorry, Mr. Jinks, I'll get to you in a minute. We did talk about the potential of using the Park and Rec building. Obviously, under its current size, it's just too small.
Right.
If there is acreage available that doesn't impact the overall usability of the high school, I think we would certainly consider that. There's no reason why we wouldn't. And again, our charge from the council was not to put Humiston at this Marion Road property. We just felt that while we're doing the test fit, let's look at it and make sure that that's another option in addition to any other options we may come up with. Now, from the ed spec programmable perspective, it sounds like you're better off locationally if you're closer to the high school. Let's look at options that meet that need. It sounds like Dr. Solon is also saying that he's not in love with the idea of having that school attached to another school, whether it be the high school or the elementary school. So if that's in fact the case, and that's a hard, fast situation for you, then we've got to find an alternative that meets your needs. So, we're all ears. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jinks, my apologies.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to what Chuck was saying about the 97, 95. It is true, of course, that we may, if we grow much more significantly than our projections show, sure, we're going to have an issue either way. But a 2% margin's a 2% margin. It's still, it may matter. It probably will matter. We're looking at adding a marginal amount of space perhaps to these elementary schools. So knowing what that cost is going to be would be important element to this first phase proposal for the elementary schools. There's still a margin there, so it isn't identical as I think as Chuck looks at it. But we just have a little disagreement on that fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jinks.
Good evening, Gary Riccini, RICCINI, 27 East Ridge Court. So about 2 years ago, I sat exactly where Don is when I did a failed run for BOE. I actually posted a little snippet of what I said, because actually 2 years ago, we brought up this whole school modernization committee. And I said I'd be watching, and I have. And I'm here 2 years later. And I said I would support pretty much see what folks like Chuck, I know, Jim, you were on it. I wanted to see what they came out with. And 13 people worked very hard, studied a lot of scenarios. And I have to say, right about now, as a citizen, as someone with a 7 and an 8-year-old, I'm disappointed. And I'm disappointed I'm going to try to be correct about this. There seems to be a lack of leadership at the moment. I don't mean from everybody, but you know what? I'm just going to say it. When we're sending out surveys without the backing of this group to just District 2, I wasn't going to fill it out. Sorry, not going to happen. Because right now, all of a sudden, 9-3 you lost, and now we're fighting each other, and it's muddying the waters with what's going on here. And in fact, it just looks like dissension. So when I voted for anybody, I vote for you to lead. Reaching out to the public is one thing. Sending out surveys and trying to get more surveys, really just to back your opinion, isn't leadership. I expect you guys to pick a direction. I expect you to sell it. I expect you to go out to the public and tell us why this or that option is the right one. So get behind one and let's go. That's my comment section. I do have some financial related questions. I don't know if Colliers or who can answer this. If this doesn't pass this time around, let's say we go through this a couple years from now and interest rates are higher. Can you tell me like what a half point increase in interest rates actually does to our bill and the actual effect of the taxes and things of that nature? I knew someone here would be able to do that. So, you know, I have a history in somewhat in finance to a degree, more of an investing. And I'm like, if we kick the can on this and interest rates rise from here, which they're still pretty low, quarter point when you start, half point when you start talking hundreds of millions of dollars, I'd love to know what that effect is if we're still here 3 years from now.
Mr. Riccini, I'm lucky I have my trusty HP 12C here.
Rob, you're going old school right there,
I
man.
am going old school, but it's never let me down. So just to put some collars on this, if you used $83 million, which I think is about the net number of one of the phase one scenario, at a 0.5% interest rate increase over 20 years is $4.152 million. So if interest rates go up a 0.5%, that's $4 million of additional debt service on $83 million. If that tries to answer what you're asking.
No, it does, because where I'm going with this is in the two scenarios. I was at the meeting last night, and I decided not to comment at that time. Scenario one, if I'm right, or we'll call it the elementary school option, says it's about $389 per year of taxes, correct? The middle school option, $612, correct? That's a 57% increase. And we're selling scenario one only in the referendum. So how are you going to sell a 57% increase in taxes on the middle school option to those people that have no vested interest in the school system, that have no kids, that are on a fixed income? I'd love to know what the plan is to sell that option, because we're doing a lot of talking. And it's parents. I've talked to parents. I talk to parents too. I know a lot of them that are going to vote for either one. But if you're on a fixed income and you're trying to sell phase one, if you're going to put in front of someone with a fixed income, 389 versus 612, which one do you think they're going to choose? So I'd love to know how you guys are going to combat that as a group if you end up going down the middle school path. So with that, I just throw a lot of questions and comments. That's pretty much it. I appreciate the time. I do appreciate all the work. I wouldn't want to have questions fired at me like you guys have to deal with. So I appreciate you taking that.
Thank you, Mr. Riccini. I have no problem. Thank you, Mr. Jinks. I'll get to you in a second. I have no problem with throwing questions, and I've always said I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. What I try not to do is listen and never respond. So when I don't respond, it's because I can't get an answer, and we'll do our best. But you raise an interesting point, is that part of our analysis on the town council side is making sure that we can implement a plan that's fiscally sound and prudent so that we maintain our AAA credit rating. That is critically important to our borrowing base, the interest rates that you're talking about. We're borrowing at less than, 2% now, Jim? Because we're AAA rated credit. The more borrowings we take on, the more that goes at risk. So there's a balancing act of how much debt we can afford to take on as a community, and all of a sudden we're no longer AAA rated credit, thereby increasing our interest rates, thereby increasing our debt service, thereby increasing the mill rate and what falls on the backs of our taxpayers. So you're asking a good question. These are the things that we've talked about as a group, all 9 of us, ad nauseum. And those that aren't paying attention may not know it, but we are. And so, I love having these dialogues on any side of the aisle on this, because we are trying to take it all into account. And while finances plays a part in it, it doesn't play a total part. But finances does play a big part. And part of that is maintaining our AAA credit rating, which I just talked about. So thank you for bringing that up. Mr. Jenks.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment to Gary. Thank you, Gary, for coming out to speak tonight. The comments you made about the survey, the reason why I put the survey out was not to support my point of view. My point of view doesn't really necessarily matter all that much. Like I said earlier, the high school would have been my choice. I have been hearing entirely comments I've been hearing have been almost entirely in favor of one side. So I wanted to find out I wanted to get a better sense of the true picture. I need to make a decision at some point on how I'm going to vote on this, whether or not we advance, whatever we advance for a referendum. So I feel a need to get a better sense of what the public is thinking. You may disagree with that as a leadership skill or leadership tactic. I don't. So I'm not trying to create dissension. I'm trying to, like everyone else, get to a successful referendum the first time. And again, all the feedback we've had on the council, almost all the feedback I've had, talking to people at the doors, going back a year or last spring when we had the two options put up on my Facebook page, all the feedback I got was for the 6th grade middle school, talking to PTAs, feedback is largely middle school. So that's the track that seems like people have been on more or less. And so I just wanted to get a better sense of what people were thinking. Also to put out something that informed people about the two options, because it was clear in talking to people at the doors, especially in September, that people just didn't know. A lot of people just didn't know what the two options were. So that's where the survey came from. It was not to put out or try to get a certain response back. Again, I think it's valuable information. I hope that the town or the Board of Ed does something like that. But that's where I stand.
I appreciate the point of view.
Thank you,
One
Mr.
thing I
Jenks.
wanted to ask, and I didn't last night, and this is actually for Jeff, for Dr. Solon. I think I know the answer, but if the elementary school option comes up, if that's what's sent to the table, would you vote for it?
I don't have a vote.
If you did, as a member of the public, as a general voter?
Obviously, that's a hypothetical, but the question, that Rob mentioned earlier, asking me from an educational perspective, and that's what I'm paid to make decisions around, is that, what's educationally sound.
And as I said last night in the meeting, it's a 1 and 1A. It's not a worlds apart situation. And I have said publicly that I do have a preference for 6 through 8. But there are so many facets to this decision and so many variables that it's a mild preference. I still think that 2 elementary schools would be a vast improvement, and it's the current programming we have now, and we're pretty wildly successful now. I don't think from an educational perspective that it's a significant detriment to go one way or another.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riccini. Thank you, Dr. Solon. Other members of the audience? Anybody? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the last item. There is another item on the agenda which I will be recusing myself from. So I'll be turning the rest of the meeting over to Vice Chairman Slocum. Breaks my heart that I get to leave now. So good luck to the rest of the council. Good night, and thank you to everyone who's been here and listened tonight.
Okay. Okay, thank you all. We're going to now go to item number 8, which is discussion and possible action regarding the TIF credit enhancement agreement. And I will ask for a motion to go into executive session to include the town attorney, finance director, chairman of the TIF committee, Don Dobbs, and economic development chairman, Bill Stanley, Andrew, Noel, and Mr.
I
Shaw.
will move that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have a motion, a second. We are in executive session. Okay. Be it resolved that the town council approves resolution 101421-3. Be it resolved the town council approves the credit enhancement agreement between the town of Cheshire and TriStar Development LLC and Miller Napolitano Wolf LLC as presented, and further authorizes the town manager, Sean N. Kimball, to execute said agreement. We have a motion, we have a second from Mrs. Nichols. Any further discussion, or are we just ready to vote, guys? Okay, all those in favor? Motion carries of those present.
Move we adjourn?
Terrific. We're out of here. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you.